Welcome back to Dangerous Rhetoric, everyone. This is episode 123. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. I'm Dan. This is Brent.
Hi.
Hey, what's up? And today we have a very special guest. Mr. Kalen Eriksson is joining us. Kalen is the founder of TriFilm Pictures and is also the former senior creative producer at Project Veritas, which we are going to discuss today and set the record straight about what actually happened there during the parting of ways between the investigative organization and James O'Keefe, its founder. So we're going to talk about Kalen's career, and we're going to go into that story. And we will also be dropping a cache of files and receipts to go along with this conversation to verify everything that Kalen is talking about. Kalen, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on. You know, Dan's been trying to get me to talk about this for over a year now, to which I adamantly refused. But, you know, now I'm at the point now that it's like, screw it, why not? So you're blowing the whistle on a whistleblower organization, sort of. I wouldn't say I'm blowing the whistle on a whistleblower organization, more so just providing more insight into a situation that no one really ever got the full picture of. You know, a lot was spoken about of this, you know, at the time. Really, this time last year was really, you know, February through April that this was, you know, really hot last year. And so there was a lot going around, and everybody's obviously seen the, you know, commentators, influencers, and the different pieces of information that were floating around, but no one ever heard a voice definitively from Project Veritas that gave a side of their story. And it was a very different side than what most people heard. And I feel like most people weren't even asking that question. And so it's just something that's bothered me, and it's bothered a lot of my former colleagues for a year now, that we lived through something that was, you know, pretty crazy, and it really sucked at the time. And, you know, we got dragged for it in ways people don't really quite understand. And so even though we've all thankfully moved on and, you know, we're all doing great right now, it's, you know, it's still something that weighs on you. And so especially with my esteemed former journalist colleague, Justin, doing, you know, what he's doing now, and so much of that going around, I just saw so much happening now that I'm like, there is just so much misinformation about this whole thing floating around that I just had to say something. And I'm not on some mission to destroy James O'Keefe or anything like that. As you'll hear from my experience, I was very close with James, and this whole experience hurt me back then in a really deep way. But there are things that have been said and done since then that are just blatant lies or hyperbole that's verging on being a blatant lie. And I just feel like that needs to be set straight for, you know, the sake of my colleagues and everybody that really associated Project Veritas for all the great work they did throughout the years.
I think that's an admirable reason to do it. You know, and getting to know you and being your friend, I can definitely testify that you are not the type of person who's doing this for attention or for a vendetta or that sort of thing. But you care about the truth. You are a very hard worker. You care about the stories. That was why you worked at Project Veritas as a producer. And you're one of the reasons that a lot of those breaking stories that so many Americans find to be important got out there for us to see. So you were involved in all of those major decisions. And I think this testimony, I hope, will clarify some of the misconceptions about what actually happened there. But before we jump into all of that in detail, I want to, you know, get more of the Kalen Eriksson backstory. So you are very into film. That's what you studied. Where did you go to school, and what got you into film and producing, and why did you decide to take your life in that direction?
The Kalen Eriksson story. So, yeah, I started making movies with my friends and my cousins, I think back, you know, 8 or 9 years old with a Sony Handycam, and we would just, you know, go out in the yard and come up with these crazy stories and turn the swing set into a fort and just come up with these crazy just scenarios and figure out how can we film this and edit it. And it was just a good time. And I, in some insane thought, figured I'd make that a career path. So I made films all through college. I made movies all through college and in high school. Music videos with my friends. I actually got my whole graduating class in high school to participate in making an hour-and-a-half long, so feature length, like crime suspense movie that I would never dredge out into the public eye now, but we had a great time doing it. And filmed all throughout the town and the school and everything else. It was great.
I've seen some of it. It's funny.
Yeah. So I went to Fairleigh Dickinson in New Jersey, and I studied film there. And like every other kid who goes to school thinking that they want to do film, I figured I'd go into directing. And so went through my first 2 years, you know, just going through my classes and trying to learn what I can and whatnot. And I was asked by the end of my sophomore year to produce a senior that I know, his thesis film for school. And I was like, oh, sure. So I did that, and I loved the process, and it was great. And I started to do that more and more and more. And then I realized that a lot of what I always loved about the filmmaking process, you know, from way back when I first started, sort of fell more in line with the producing side of things. Obviously, a director has a hand in everything, but from a producing side, just, you know, recognizing a story, developing a story, working with other creative people to see, okay, we have this, how are we going to now make that a real thing, assembling the logistics of all that together, and then seeing that come to life on set. Like, that's what I really loved. And so I just sort of fell into this role of producing at that point and grew from there in that. You know, I graduated and then went immediately into a job with Fox in the city. I was working for, you know, one of their broadcast shows there. Did that for 2 years, got a lot of experience, but was feeling extremely burnt out from that.
You said Vox, V-O-X?
No, Fox.
Fox.
You were a production assistant.
I was a production assistant at Fox, yeah. The infamous News Corp building.
So you got involved into politics and the whole political, social commentary, media world and market kind of right out of college, even though that wasn't necessarily what you were aiming to do, though. It's
not what I wanted to do, no. I had interned with them while I was still in school, and it was with the Fox Business Network. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I did two semester internships with that, and they hired me immediately at the gate. So I graduated a semester early. So I finished December 2013. By, you know, the week after I finished classes, they called me and offered me a job. So there was no transition to the real world. It was just classes on Friday, work on Monday. Like, that's just how it went from there. And so, which I was very thankful for. And obviously, you know, working in business news was not what I was aiming for, but I figured, you know, I'll make some great contacts. I'm within sort of the Fox Corporation, and it'd be great to be able to use those connections to move on to 20th Century and go from there. So that's sort of what my mindset was. And it was great. You know, the people I worked with were great, you know, getting live TV experience, control room experience, booking guests, that whole side of producing was really cool. But, it's a lot, especially when it's not really what you're into. And so I burnt out pretty quick. So after 2 years of that, I actually ended up moving to Norway for almost 6 months and worked on a personal project there. Reconnected with some family, some relatives that we have that live over there, and sort of just got my head in a space for doing my own thing. And so I came back, and by early 2016 was producing my first film out of school. It was a script that one of my former, you know, friends at school had put together, but it was way too ambitious to do as his thesis film. So it was this whole sort of almost a Viking epic. And so I was like, screw it, let's just make it. So I went all around Norway while I was there. I shot B-roll, went hiking in the mountains, did a lot of research and whatnot, and came back, and we made it happen. We shot it all here. The whole thing was spoken in Icelandic. We like because we thought it sounded cooler. And so we, wrote the lines on big poster boards so the actors could read them and try to pronounce it, because they obviously don't even know what they're saying. They're just trying to, sound out the words. We shot with live wolves in upstate New York, and horses, and people from the Renaissance Fair made costumes. It was crazy, and it was a fantastic experience. And so, as for being my first film out the gate at school, it was great, and it won some pretty prestigious awards. I got to travel overseas for some premieres for it, and it was a good time. And that's really what launched my personal producing company, I guess. And so from then on, I started to take on clients of my own, as well as working full time on top of that. So now I'm working with 20th Century Fox Animation at Blue Sky Studios. I started there in 2016. And so I'm doing both things right now, and just working my way more into, the film realm that I wanted. And it's just been a steady climb since then.
And so you were at Blue Sky up until, so Blue Sky got bought out by Disney, right? I remember I was looking this up.
Yes. And so when I was first hired, it was still under 20th Century Fox. And
so you were there through that transition period.
Correct. Yeah. I think it was after a year and a half or so that I was there that Disney bought it out.
And then the last film you worked on was Spies in Disguise, right? With
yes, it was
Tom Holland. Brent likes that movie. He's a fan.
Yeah. Technically, I also worked on. So right before Blue Sky shut down, we made these shorts for about Scrat, the Ice Age squirrel that were put on Disney Plus. Cool. So I technically worked on those, but yeah, the last movie there was Spies in Disguise.
And so fast forward, it's 2020, COVID happens, they close everything down. You guys aren't going to the office anymore. And then eventually Blue Sky shuts down, correct?
Yes.
So
Blue Sky, the announcement was made February 2021.
And it was shortly after this that, you're looking for a new job. And that's how you found out about Project Veritas. And that kind of brings us back to, well,
it was sort of lucky timing in that I was looking for a job sort of well before February 2021. So obviously 2020 was a crazy year, to say the least, for literally everybody. Yeah. And so I still consider myself so lucky to have had a full-time job, that was remote throughout the whole year. And so I'm very thankful for that. However, being under the Disney umbrella at the time, especially in the, sort of environment that we were in at that time, the sort of work culture just got so politicized that it was just unbearable to be a part of. And I mean, I was feeling that for the last few years at Blue Sky anyway. I mean, even before COVID happened, I mean, I had an entire department of people that I didn't even work with spread this around that I was like a white supremacist or something, because they saw a Louder with Crowder mug on my desk at one point. Like, I never talk politics in the office. It's not like I have any, people don't know who I voted for. Like, I don't talk about that at all. But, I don't talk about everything else that they do. And so that's automatically seen as like, oh, you must think the other way sort of thing. So it was definitely what, everybody expects for, some creative studio environment to be full of nice, albeit radical, super left people who've never, thought of anything else. So I was already very, very tired of that job. And then especially once the election in 2020 hit, I was done. And I was like, I need to be using my talents for something else. And I remember my computer was actually right here, and a diversity seminar for Disney was playing. And I was lying on my couch back there thinking, like, what the hell is this life now? What is this job? What is any of this? And so as I'm just letting this play out so that it looks like I'm there, I'm trying to think of new jobs to do. And I thought of, oh, well, Project Veritas does cool stuff, and I feel like I want to make a difference, and I want to use my talents to sort of help some of this craziness that we're seeing right now and everything. So I just looked on their website, and I happened to see a producer opening. So I applied to them, And I finally heard back from them in December. And so by the time February rolled around and Blue Sky shut down, I was actually already in the Veritas sort of candidacy. And it was a long interview process. I mean, they didn't even officially hire me until April. But
Okay.
so, yeah, but it was in the works. And so that's where it all started.
So April 2021, you joined the organization. What were some of the first major stories that you worked on? There's one that comes to mind that I can immediately think of that you may have been a part of, and that was the CNN staffer story.
Daniel, side note, isn't that when we started DR? It was like right around.
We actually did start DR in April 2021. It was around that same. So
That's funny.
Look at that.
Yeah, same period.
I started April 12th, 2021, and that was the release day of one of those Charlie Chester videos.
Okay.
I think it was part 1 or part 2, but I walked in and everybody's, I mean, you would think we were in like DEF CON, we're underground bunker, that's how everyone's acting.
Yeah.
It's just craziness. And
do you want to remind the people about the Charlie Chester story? Because I'm sure there's people that are watching this that have no idea who he is or what that story was about.
Oh yeah. It was this technical director. Yeah, a technical director at CNN who was basically saying things like, we're not inflating, but we keep showing the death count for COVID to keep people scared because fear sells.
He said it was gangbusters for the ratings.
Yeah.
But the other things I remember from that story that were pretty damning was he basically said like CNN had a goal to try to get Trump out of office. And I remember one of the other drops was they were misrepresenting crime statistics between races. They were trying to make it seem like most of the hate crime happening toward Asians at the time, who were blaming them for COVID, were happening from white people and white supremacists, when the actual numbers were, it was Black folks who were committing most of those crimes against Asians. And CNN was deliberately downplaying those numbers because they didn't want to piss off Black Lives Matter people and, those on the left, their viewership.
Yeah, no, it was a good story. I mean, the journalist who put that together, obviously I ended up meeting her and worked with her for the 2 years after, and she's great. And that was a real quality story. It really was.
I remember that one getting around, and it definitely impacted Brent and I. We were talking about that, and like he said, this was around the same time we started the podcast, and that was certainly one of the stories that came up on our radar that we were railing about when it happened. So we'll fast forward a bit. So the next thing I wanted to ask about was some of the other projects you ended up working on besides these stories, and that includes the music video that Project Veritas put out. There was a musical you worked on. We'll get into all of that. And also the Project Veritas experience. The first one being the Oligarchy music video. That came out May, I want to say, 2021.
Yeah.
Okay.
That ended up being, I was there for like 2 weeks, and that became my project.
One of your first projects.
Yeah. That was my thing. Yeah. So basically, my film background automatically qualified me for every creative endeavor that James O'Keefe had. And I didn't mind it. I mean,
hey, you're getting work and you're good at what you do, and you're good at organizing everything. So
I didn't mind it. I mean, and that was the funny thing about Project Veritas. It was such a collection of hardcore, super serious journalists to, dopey conspiracy theorists to creative people that, worked in the industry. And so it was a really cool mix. So I didn't mind. And I always appreciated the fact that James did try to tie, creative things into his work, even if the audience didn't appreciate it. And if sometimes it didn't come across quite as I think we all were hoping it would. I had a good time doing it. And so anyway, that became my first thing. And so I directed it when we shot it. And James gave me some ideas prior of what he wanted it to look like. And so I put the whole shoot together, basically, directed the cameras, all that, got it all going, and then, did the whole edit for the next week or so before it was released. And so that was a that really sort of set me on my path through the rest of my time at Project Veritas. That, you know, while I was obviously involved with the production team and eventually, you know, overseeing or helping to oversee the editors and doing story edits and things like that, my sort of bread and butter, my assignments always trended towards the creative ventures.
Well, I think obviously James realized you were good at that. You were good at, and he wanted to do more of that, like you said, which we'll get into because that became one of the contentious issues at the organization, was this leaning toward using donor money for these creative endeavors. I remember when Oligarchy dropped, and you know, I thought it was funny and kind of witty, but also a little corny, and I could understand why, you know, people were criticizing it, because it was kind of, I don't want to say it was the first time, but it was the first time that there was a major produced thing,
correct,
that Project Veritas released that was not journalistic related. And I feel like a lot of people wanted Project Veritas to simply just remain focused on the stories, journalism, doing the investigations. And if you're going to do this other creative stuff, like do that as a separate venture. At least that was some of the criticism I remember.
That's also a problem with like every brand though, right? Like people get used to you for a certain thing. They follow you for a certain reason. And as soon as you deviate from, you know, your brand, your typical content, whatever it is, that's just the rabble rousing begins. It's all like,
this is something that James and I would talk a lot about. It's like people created this image in their minds of what they wanted James to be. And sometimes that wasn't reality. You know, James is, and always was, an extremely sort of creatively minded person. I mean, I think he was a theater kid. I mean, and it shows, like that's really what he's into. And he found a way to sort of take that interest and channel it into this journalistic route. But people seem to forget that that's really what the root of everything was. And so for him to try to tie that in as much as possible only makes sense. And for people to say, you know, oh, well, stick to journalism. You can't, you know, you got to be serious. We're at war, yada, yada, yada. It's like, well, then you completely missed the point of Acorn. You missed the point of all these other things that were basically built on that theatrical side of things. And if done well, it can work well. Now, did we do some things that were extremely campy? Yeah. And so I understand the, you know, people being upset about that. But I do think that unfortunately, like Brent said, the Project Veritas audience got caught in this specific image of what they wanted James and PV to be, that they couldn't really see the value in having some, you know, something a little bit different.
Yeah, at least some level of it. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with that. I personally was not opposed to it when it came out. It didn't bother me the way it bothered others. But I can.
Could it have done better? Could there be better dancing and everything? Sure, but you know, some more irreverent content to highlight some of the actual stuff PV did, but in not a dry talking head news way, but a, you know, fun sort of catchy way. I mean, you're never going to forget it. I mean, so it's got that going for it. So I think people kind of missed the point in a way, but I do think that we could have done better if we planned it more. We never planned things at Project Veritas. We just did them.
We just did them. So the next thing, kind of staying on this theme of the organization beginning to lean more into that creative stuff, and this was probably even more contentious, was when James decided to join a musical, and that was Oklahoma, which was put on by Brian Cloudis Experiences. We had Brian Cloudis on the show. We chatted with him about all of that. He was very, very fascinating man, very creative, you know, very sweet. You know, and again, I didn't necessarily see the problem with this per se, but I think the criticisms coming from within the organization about, at least the questions and concerns about, should we be spending donor money on this and time and energy on this? So this was also 2021, right? Around when was the musical?
This was August. So I was traveling with James, just the two of us, for the last week in July, you know, doing sort of donor meetings, presentations, things like that. We flew right to Virginia, and then I lived with him for a month in Virginia while he did this show. And so Project Veritas rented this cabin at this closed ski resort in Virginia, and we lived there for the entire month. And other people would sort of filter in and out throughout the month, but it was me and a small handful of others that were literally there the entire time that, you know, would basically split our days between actual Project Veritas stuff and like filming the rehearsals and helping James with musical related things. And so, you know, I'm still new. I mean, I'm still less than like 6 months into my job. So I'm not sort of complaining too much about it. And it's cool I'm from Virginia, so it's cool to be down there and not be in an office in Westchester. But looking back, I can obviously see the concern from the company standpoint in just how much money was spent to keep staff down there in comparison to the actual amount of, you know, productive PV work that was done on the premises. Because, I mean, we had crappy Wi-Fi. There was basically no internet. We couldn't get anything done. And so we were basically shooting all of this stuff with the justification that it would be part of like a documentary series about PV down the road and all that. And obviously that didn't turn into anything. So, and I felt bad for the, you know, the office team that was left, because there was basically no one at the office the whole time. And they're still expected to churn out story after story. And, you know, they were short staffed and they were all, you know, worn pretty thin. So it was just a very stressful time for, you know, the company in general being split like that. And it was, you know, that's what really started to, I guess, create a dividing line between people that were more into the creative stuff and more into the strict, you know, traditional PV work.
Interesting. And so Oklahoma happens, you guys wrap that up. There's growing tensions in the organization. You come back from Virginia, you return to the office, and I'm trying to think what comes next. So the hurricane hits.
Yeah, I'm back in the office for a day and the flood hits. Yeah.
Gotcha. So go into that. That was, I thought, an interesting story.
So that just, you know, escalated things. And so we were all at the office late the day it happened because we were releasing, or no, we had just released the Gabriel Geip story, the Antifa teacher that was from California, basically saying that he radicalizes his students.
I remember that.
And so that night was the parent-teacher, the PTA conference. And so it was live streamed. And so we were at the office watching it and seeing these, you know, parents say these awesome things that you've never seen said, you know, to a board like that before. And so we weren't paying attention to what was going on outside, and the office has no windows. It's a garage basically. So, and we're in edit bays where there's no light. So we had no idea it was even raining until the night security guard came in at like 10 o'clock and was like, you know, if anyone has their car in the street, you should maybe move it because it's starting to flood. And so we go outside, and no, it wasn't starting to flood. There was like a foot of water outside.
Oh my God.
And so
this is a Hurricane Ida, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was like it was whatever piece of that hit New Jersey and New York.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and still we don't think anything of it. You know, the parking lot next to our building is on a bit of a hill. And so we just moved our cars up to that and figured we'd wait for the rain to stop or at least die down before we tried to go home. And it obviously didn't. And so
your car got flooded out.
And it was crazy. And it was within an hour that the water was up to both doors, the front door and the back door. The power in the building blinked out, and we were like, we had to get out of here now. So the few of us that were left, we trudged through like hip deep rushing water of sewage and gas and everything else to get to this apartment complex that was behind our building. And yeah, it was crazy. And obviously that became our project for the next month because we had no office. So and James was still in the musical at this time. So James was there at the office, and he had to be in Virginia the next day for another show. So we're looking at the rain, we're looking at the flooding. James is there, and before we know it, James is not there anymore. He just disappeared. He lived down the street, he booked it home and went down to Virginia.
Okay. So he just kind of left the office in disarray and then dealt with that, I guess, later. So the office got wrecked, right? It got destroyed.
The office was demolished. Yeah.
I remember when that story came out. I remember reading about this when it happened, because I was already following, Project Veritas and all the work that was being done there. That is crazy. So I guess you had to get a new car, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just move it. It'll be fine over here, not fine over there.
No.
That's crazy. Oh boy. Yeah. So the flood happens, and we fast forward a little bit. That was September. And now we get to November. And this was when the Ashley Biden diary controversy and FBI raids happened, correct?
Yeah. So I was in upstate New York with James and some of the team on sort of like a leadership retreat they do every year, just to go over the, plans for the next year and, sort of look ahead sort of stuff. And so we were all there, and a day into this sort of conference that we had is when we got alerted to the FBI raids of Eric Cochran and Spencer Meads. And so obviously everybody's really sort of shaken by that. We're trying to figure out, what do we do? What do we say? How do we address this? And we thought we can't not say something. So that was when we wrote this video, and James shot it there at the hotel where we were staying. And it basically ran through for the audience, and it was helpful for me because I wasn't aware of a lot of this at the time too, because Ashley Biden, all that happened before I even started. Mm-hmm. So, we laid out very clearly why the diary is significant, what PV thought at the time, why they said they didn't release it, and now the FBI seemed to be going after them for it. And then it was a day or so later that James's apartment was raided. And so, yeah, that was a very stressful time, and all of our efforts at that point basically turned to FBI and legal videos and just every update that we could possibly, keep the audience involved in, court filings, all that stuff. It was a nightmare.
And they didn't actually end up charging anybody with anything, right?
No.
That was like totally a fishing expedition over the diary.
Yeah.
And at the time,
they confiscated laptops, cell phones. To my knowledge, they still haven't gotten any of that back yet.
Wow.
It was bad. Yeah.
And I remember also at the time, there was a lot of question, like, is this real? Like, we didn't, it wasn't really confirmed until, well, I guess recently with the conviction of the woman who supposedly stole the diary, although I guess her defense was that, Ashley left it behind. And I guess it's, whose word against whose, but I guess, Ashley is determined to say that she, had it stolen. But this woman is now going to be like serving, I can't remember, but it was not a small amount of time. It was like 18 months or something for the theft of this diary, which for a while was sort of even, the veracity of the document was even in question. But now that this woman's been convicted of stealing it, I think there's no way, the fact that they went after Project Veritas, there's no way that they can deny that the contents were the actual written words of Ashley Biden.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, that's why. So there, as I understand it, and I can't speak on this completely because I wasn't there, but as I understand it and speaking to my colleagues who were, there was immense internal debate on whether or not to publish the story. People obviously wanted it out at the time. Others didn't. And as I understand it, they made the decision they did because, yes, they could confirm the diary was Ashley Biden's, but there was no way of confirming if the content that was written in it had any validity to it. And so to blast not only intimate personal details about another person, but also intimate, details that could not actually be proven and could just be slanderous and just basically meant to harm, a president that nobody likes, is morally wrong. And so that was the reason they didn't publish.
No, I think that makes sense. And honestly, like, it's kind of ironic because the way that the FBI went about, the way that they went about their business, basically sort of ended up doing the thing.
Yeah, they verified it.
They verified it. They got the contents out there. People leaked, pages. Like, it's
well, that's what I was about to bring up. Someone leaked pages from it, correct? And was that inside?
So at the time, Project Veritas did not release. However, something happened, and those pages were leaked, and a smaller outlet on the web released them, and nobody really even saw it. But the pages were out there well before, Project Veritas did anything about it.
Fascinating. So, there was obviously a lot of fallout from that. I imagine everyone at the organization, not just James O'Keefe, but everyone was probably under a lot of pressure. Were you also worried that they were going to show up and raid you? Was everyone just like, are they coming for me next?
I mean, some people were. I tend to just not be sensationalist like that. I tend to, I guess, underscore my own. I don't want to say importance, but I guess, I underscore my own importance. And that, like, I'm like, they're not going to, I'm not scared of that.
You're just like, I'm nobody. They're not going
to. They're not going to talk to me. I'm not going to, like, play up this situation and be dramatic. And, it's like, there's no reason to do that. But I mean, the lawyers and some outside counsel did speak to some colleagues who were present at the time, just to, because there were people that had serious concerns about that because they were there. And there was just a lot of uncertainty in general. And we're working out of a temporary workspace on top of all that because the office still doesn't exist. And so there was just no stability at all at that time. So it was pretty crazy. And then this is when the microscope stuff came about also.
Okay, so that was, and we'll get into that more at the end because I want to.
Can I just, Kalen, I ask you, how did James react to the FBI raid?
He was obviously shaken by it, and it's a tough thing because I'm not going to pretend to know what it feels like to have the FBI basically, knock down your door and put you in handcuffs and tear your house apart. He's definitely not allowed anybody to forget that since then. And definitely tries to bring that story up in every chance that he gets. But no matter your feelings on James, it was a vast and gross overreach that should never have happened. And still nobody's really, putting too much into that at all. And so at the time we did get some, non-friendly media support, places that are not fans of Project Veritas that were saying that what the FBI did was wrong. So he was excited about that. And we all tried to be there for him and just be as supportive as we could be. But he was obviously upset by it. Yeah.
And so after all of this happens, it's kind of when the Project Veritas Experience show was conceived, correct?
Yeah. So obviously working with Brian Cloudis had a lasting effect on James. And I think that
he wanted to do more theater.
He wanted to do more theater. And so the first iteration came about when we were going to have James do a presentation at that America Fest for Turning Point in December 2021. Because he does something there every year, basically. And typically he does, your predictable speech and whatnot. And so instead, James wanted to create the Project Veritas experience, in which we basically take scenes from his new book at the time that we were finishing up, American Muckraker, and turn them into these theatrical vignettes of the history of his life and Project Veritas. And so we made a short version for this Turning Point presentation, and then we made an hour-long version for the book launch party at the end of January 2022 that was in Miami. And so
is that what
I was in charge of that whole thing, and I had to recruit people at Project Veritas, journalists to be actors, people to be stagehands, and create this show to theatrically tell James's story.
And that's what I have pictured here, right?
This is from the setup
party.
of the book party, yeah.
The launch party.
Okay.
So, you know, as someone who produced these projects, did you eventually start to have, say, similar concerns as other staff members about whether or not it was a proper use of the donor funds, we'll say? Like, how did you feel about all of it at the time? Because you did the music video, then you're doing the musical, and then now all of a sudden there's another musical. Around this time, did you start to also kind of have concerns about, well, hey, are we getting diverted from the real mission of this company and towards something else that isn't as relevant, or is this, a good use of the money?
So I wasn't concerned about the diversion from the mission, because I was justifying in my head, whether for myself or for James, that it was on brand. At the very least, it was marketing, and at the most, we were finding a memorable way to get people interested in the book and past stories of Project Veritas. I was concerned, however, about the money being spent, because there was basically this attitude of a blank check and do whatever you have to do to make it happen. And there was virtually no pushback, because it's what James wanted. And so, it was a little frustrating that we're having this event at the Fontainebleau in Miami, not because it was conducive for the event, but because James liked the idea of having it at the Fontainebleau. So we're using this ballroom at the Fontainebleau, and now I have to build a stage and everything to make the show even happen. So now I'm hiring an outside company that I've worked with, and we're putting in 60 grand of a light show and a stage. And then you have the costumes and everything after that. You have the outside dancers who we not only paid, but also, flew in and lodged for multiple trips. The salaries of everybody that, made that happen. And coming from a producing background, obviously I'm used to having to work within a tight budget. Mm-hmm. And so just having basically a blank check to make all this happen, sure, it made it easier at the time, but it was certainly a concern of mine. And I spoke to, the team afterwards about it, our events coordinator, Dan Strack, COO, and a few, he was just coming on at the time. He wasn't in the company yet. But, just getting people in line. Look, I'm all for doing this again, because James wants to do it again. He enjoyed it. The audience seemed to enjoy it. We got a Rolling Stone article out of it. Like, we can make this a fun, irreverent way to keep Project Veritas' story going in a way that no one else is doing. But we have to do it the right way. We have to do it within budget, and we can't just willy-nilly just be like, oh, James wants to have a, dance show, and so, spend whatever we have to put it together. Like, we have to be thoughtful about it and make sure there's an actual justifiable reason for those funds being used. And obviously that kind of just spiraled. So
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
that, I mean, that was the last theatrical thing that you ended up doing there, as far as I know. Although you did do American Fest again, right, the following year.
Yeah. So basically, we tried to do the Project Veritas experience again at something called Freedom Fest in Vegas that July 2022. And so a lot of money and a lot of time was spent from February to July trying to make this event work. And this, I mean, it almost feels a little bit like Firefest, honestly. But like I flew out to Vegas multiple times, scouted locations. We picked a venue. We got a deal with that venue. We got things rolling. But the marketing and everything just went out way late for this because of the venue. Like, we got the venue to say yes, but they wouldn't give us a contract, so we weren't set. They wouldn't let us sell our own tickets. It was a mess to figure out. So everything went out late, and then at the last minute, the venue canceled on us because they figured out who we were and they said we don't do political events. So then myself and the events coordinator had 2 weeks to come up with some sort of after party because James still wanted to have an after party. So we still hired dancers, we still got a venue, and we still did a miniature version in Vegas that year.
And then you guys did American Fest again, I think was that 2022, when you brought the whistleblowers on stage. You organized that as well, right? And the presentation for that.
Yes. Yeah. So we did another sort of, it was toned down. It wasn't completely dancing choreography there, but there was a little bit. But, you know, we had a bunch of dancers and people on stage. This is that, correct? We had a bunch of dancers and people on stage. And we brought out all the whistleblowers up to that point, sort of culminating in the reveal of Kyle Seraphin, because he was the FBI whistleblower that we got earlier that year. We released his story, and this was supposed to be like a big reveal, basically.
Yeah, I remember that. James introduced him as the bravest person I know.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see them at odds now, going at each other, which I guess we'll get into a little later. So, you know, let's fast forward now to Project Veritas's biggest story, which was the Pfizer story. And, you know, when that came out, this was February, correct?
January 2023.
So it's the end of January 2023. This story drops. It goes viral. It gets international coverage, millions and millions of views. And it's shortly after that that the controversy unfolds.
Daniel, you just want to recap that?
Yeah, well, I'll let Kalen recap. So, you know, how did the Pfizer story come about with what's his name? Jordan Walker.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And, you know, and then we'll lead into all the events that followed that immediately after.
Yeah. So as per standard, you know, the journalists of Project Veritas sort of, you know, had an ongoing assignment to, you know, flip through dating apps and see who they can, you know, talk to maybe make connections and get the next story. And so I was called into the journalist room sometime early January by James, who wanted me to see this video that undercover journalist BAM, Just Integrity, had gotten from a recent meeting. And it was his first meeting with Jordan Walker, basically talking about this directed evolution of the COVID virus. And I told him, absolutely, that's extremely interesting. We need to get this developed ASAP. So we did. The three of us, you know, left. I got the production team together and we got to work on that. We arranged for, I believe, 2 additional meetings with, you know, the final one where James actually came out and we shot that. So, and that's usually how the process goes. You know, if an undercover journalist has a meeting like that and they have some piece of or nugget of information that is interesting or we think could be expanded upon, we conceptualize how do we turn that into a story and give them, you know, the insight they need on how to take that the next step further. And so, because again, we're not looking for sound bites, we're looking for an actual story. We're looking for something that's, you know, cohesive and makes sense. We're not looking for just one-offs that set Red Twitter on fire. So we got that going, and it was a great process. And you know, and sort of in the midst of all this, James got his Twitter back. So James lost his Twitter back. I think this was like the first week I started, April 2021.
Sounds about right. That they were doing a lot of social media purging.
Yeah. So James lost his Twitter back then, and this is sort of in the midst of Elon buying Twitter and sort of starting to be actually in charge of things. And, you know, going through the process, James got his Twitter back. And this, for me, was sort of the definitive beginning of the end, because it became clear early on, especially leading up to the Jordan Walker story, that the indicator of success for us was not media coverage, it was not response, and it was not
accountability.
Action. It was Twitter count. It was view count. It was, you know, we get 3 million views. That's a success. That doesn't translate to money, and nothing happened to Jordan Walker. Really, on every other metric of success we've used for Project Veritas stories before that point, it would have been considered a failure, honestly. You know, there were plenty of stories before that James would flat out tell us in company meetings, like, view count does not matter. He would, you know, that story may have gotten a lot of views, but what came about? Nothing. Did anything happen to those people? No. So that story wasn't a success. Now he's got his Twitter back. He's sort of he's liking the, you know, crazy influx of attention now. And it looks like that's going to be now considered our new metric of success.
Okay.
And so I didn't like that turn of events, but what can you do? The video was viral. Everybody was talking about it, and everybody in the company was super excited about it. And, you know, no matter what, it was an exciting way to start the year. You know, it was, you know, we were less than a month in and this is happening. So that's going on. And that's almost what immediately leads into everything then crashing and burning.
So the spark that lit everything crashing and burning was an event in which O'Keefe had a serious disagreement with 2 employees, correct? And that resulted in their firing. So go into that, because that is really the event that kind of set everything into motion that led to the parting of ways between him and the organization.
So let me turn back my calendar here to make sure I'm being accurate. So the last weekend in January, the 28th and 29th, James had an event in Palm Beach, I believe, in Florida, where, you know, it was a donor event. It was a fundraising event at Roger Ailes' wife's house, I believe. And so our head of fundraising at the time, Barry Hinckley, was there, and he basically had a bunch of contacts of his come to the party, and, you know, with the intent of having James mingle and raise funds. I mean, we're a nonprofit. That's what you do. Apparently, it didn't go well in the sense that nobody pledged money at the time, and James I wasn't there. James apparently came across as rude to some of the people there. So that already set a precedent. And then, so the following week, so now we are on Tuesday, January 31st, we have a weekly company leadership meeting. So all of us, sort of the heads of departments meet, and we give an outlook for, you know, the next week's goals and all that. So I'm in there, our executive producer is in there, basically the head of every department is in there. And we get to the fundraising report where the subject of this meeting came about. Apparently, James really wanted to follow up with the people they met, asking in an email to donate upwards of $25,000. And Barry Hinckley and the development team were pleading with him that that's not the right way to go about asking for that kind of money. You can't do that in an email. You have to do that face to face. You have to build connections. That was their argument. At least.
That's
not a fundraiser, but that makes sense.
I think that's a valid argument.
Yeah, yeah.
You're asking for that much money. Yeah, you know, the courteous thing to do would be to at least do it face to face.
Yeah, and it could have been
car for my organization.
I'm not sure on the exact amount of money, but I know it was 5 figures or higher.
Wow.
And they were just like, you can't ask for that in an email.
No.
And so James is remote. You know, he called into the meeting, and it just turned into a screaming match between James and Tom O'Hara, the CFO, and Barry Hinckley. And it was really uncomfortable for the rest of us because we're all just sitting in the room listening to this. And I mean, it was insane. I mean, I've been in some, you know, tense moments before at work, and I tend to think that I have a thick skin and I don't get bothered that much. But this meeting was pretty bad. It was bad, and people outside the room heard it. It got a lot of people upset, and the meeting ended. And obviously, that was not the end of it, because when he was back in the office, James ended up meeting with the development team and Barry, basically berated them and said, you know, either you do things how I want to do them, or you're not going to be here anymore. And so that's sort of how that week went. And so I knew from my standpoint of things that there was some kind of drama happening, but honestly, there was always some kind of drama happening. So I didn't really think much of it. Coming up on the first weekend of February, we're now at Thursday, the 2nd. Myself and some of the team are flying to Nashville, Tennessee to shoot an interview with who we thought would be the next Pfizer insider, Debbie Bernal. She came onto our radar. She was on our radar for a little while. She was, you know, working with our journalist team, kind of sending tidbits of information, but there was never anything that was very interesting. When the Jordan Walker story came out, there was all of this sort of immediate online controversy that no one can confirm that he is who he is. And Debbie was one of the people. We had several people. She was one of the people that sent us an internal screenshot of like a Microsoft Teams org chart that showed Jordan Walker in this Pfizer org chart. So because of that, we could verify him. And she, at that point, felt comfortable to come forward and tell whatever her story was. So we were going to Nashville to do that. I'm on the plane Thursday night. Everything seems to be fine. We land, and all of a sudden, my phone is just blowing up. It says, Tom's fired. James is going crazy. No one knows what's going on. The board is trying to get in touch with James. I'm on a flight with no Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden I land, and all this is hitting my phone.
Yeah.
So I get out of the airport. I meet up with the rest of the team, and everybody. There's just this very, very weird, you know, feeling in the air. Everyone's like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. Apparently, James was in the airport. We were supposed to meet with him and take a car with him to our hotel. He didn't come with us. He was on the phone, I'm assuming with board members, with somebody the whole time. So we get to the hotel. James eventually arrives, and I meet him in the lobby. And it was very weird because a journalist, an undercover journalist, was with him who should not have been with him. His name was Jasper. He was known by, and if you listen to any of Project Veritas's most recent videos or even sound investigations, the male voice you hear is Jasper's. I will, out of respect for him, not reveal his name, but it's been out there. And Jasper goes to me and says, no one can know that I'm here. And I'm like, I'm not trying to play any games here. I'm just here to shoot an interview. And so it's like, we go up to James's suite, and it's very weird. He and Jasper stay in this side room, and they like talk. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be prepping him for the interview, or at least talking about how the day's supposed to go. James finally comes out of this side room and just tells us to leave. So we do. Me and there were 2 other production guys there So the next morning, I meet Pam Brown, the executive producer, and Debbie Bernal for lunch, for breakfast in the lobby of the hotel to do a sort of an introductory, interview, just to get a sense of what she wants to talk about and all that. It's very standard. We do that for every single person that we, have James talk to. So we sit down with her. We start to sort of get a sense of her story. Honestly, it's extremely underwhelming, and already we're thinking like, how are we going to make this, the next Pfizer insider? Because there really wasn't much there.
She's trying to like relay,
so Debbie Bernal worked for an outside contractor, I believe, for like a point of sale system or something. That had a Pfizer location as one of their clients. So basically, as like this outside rep, she would go to people in Pfizer and be like, okay, here's this software, is it working okay? Like that kind of thing. In sort of our pre-interview with her, she basically said, we didn't talk about things outside of work. If I did meet up with Pfizer people, they never, sort of ragged about their jobs or told me things that would have been secret. It looks like Pfizer didn't treat them very well, but but I think this was like a call center. So it's not like they're working with scientists here. And so, yeah, it just seemed like not a very strong story. Her proximity to real information did not meet what we thought was a strong enough criteria to follow up the Jordan Walker story. But we're like, we'll interview her. We'll see if we can steer her in the right direction. And she did have some documents that she got from somewhere. So we'll focus on that, and we'll see what we can turn it into. So we leave, we go upstairs, and we're waiting for Debbie to show up, and she never shows up. Finally, she shows up, and she is adamantly refusing to do the interview unless Project Veritas pays to have a lawyer represent her, because she was scared of the legal implications of coming forward. And we were like, we can't do that. That's illegal. We can't like pay for your representation. We can try to help you after the fact, but you have to come forward of your own volition. We can't bribe you, basically. That's how it would come across. It would look like we bribed you, and we can't do that. And so James and her went into this other side room of James's suite, and they talked for what felt like hours. Maybe it was at least an hour, but it was a long time. And Debbie inevitably came out, and she was like, okay, I'm going to go downstairs and get dressed for the interview. She went downstairs, never came back. We got a text a while later saying she left, and she's not doing it. So whole waste of a day. So now there we all are in James's suite, set up for this interview that's not happening. There's this weird elephant in the room air of journalists hanging out that should not be there. Everybody knowing there's some kind of drama and that Tom, our CFO, was just fired. No one knows what's going on. And James is just silent. And so we were preparing to film basically some sort of update on this and sort of tell the audience like, hey, you know, we were about to unveil this person and she got cold feet. And it's just sort of a testament to what, you know, people have to do to come forward. There's a lot of, you know, mental toll that takes place and you have to be prepared for it. That didn't end up happening. We did film some like hot mic material of James. He didn't say anything super bad, but, you know, he did admit that, you know, he really tried to push her on fundraising for her after the fact, and she just wanted a promise of money right then, and we couldn't do that. So there you go. We leave Nashville, and it was then over the weekend that I get word that there's going to be a board meeting on Monday. Monday is February 6th. That they're going to talk to James, that a lot of people are really upset with James, that some employees wanted to get together and write something to sort of try to get across to both the board and James that this overall erratic behavior of firings, of screaming at people, of, you know, that all that needed to stop in order for Project Veritas to survive. And so they did, and that's inevitably where the letter came from that everybody knows about. And I was asked to sign it. I didn't sign it because I still wasn't sure where I stood on all of this yet. I thought that employees getting involved in any form at this point was too premature.
Well, you were advising them to just let the board handle it. And attached to this, you know, like I said in the beginning, we're going to have the receipts with files to verify the things you're saying. But if you look at the communications, you took a very balanced position. If I recall, some of the employees were planning a strike of some sort. You advised against that because, as you said, it was going to hurt the other staff who would end up having to pick up the slack to keep everything running, and that it wasn't fair to them. So you took a kind of moderate position. You said, you know, let's step back a little bit. Let's let the board handle this because that is their job. And if they don't, then we can consider, you know, some other type of action.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I thought was best at the time. I certainly don't fault my colleagues for writing that letter and wanting to air those things. But I mean, I did say at the time it was premature, and we all saw how that took place. So,
well, the letter ended up getting leaked somehow, correct? And then that got spread around. I think Tim Cass was talking about it, and a bunch of other people.
Once the letter was basically shown in the board meeting, and the board meeting happened, and James was put on his paid leave of absence, the letter was leaked along with the knowledge that James was going on a leave of absence, framed in obviously the notorious way that, you know, the story unrolled from there.
So James claimed he was fired, but that's not what happened.
At the time, no. James was very silent at the time. So nobody went into the office on February 6th. It ended up being closed because they had the board meeting there. The board meeting was 5.5 hours long. You guys have listened to said board meeting.
Yes, and for everyone listening, we are going to release the audio of that board meeting, which has never been released before. So if any other journalists out there or people interested in hearing what actually happened at that meeting would like to hear it, you can now listen to it.
So based on your knowledge of the situation and then hearing that meeting, what were your takeaways?
So I did listen to all of it. It took me a little while because it's kind of long and I wanted to take a little notes. My impression was, you know, I did hear James's apology and I felt him, you know, I don't know if I'm going to say if it was sincere or not sincere. I can't tell, you know, I've never really met the guy. I can't comment on that, but he did apologize. He did own up to the mistakes, but he seemed to feel that there should be no other actions taken. Just forgive me and let's move on from this. But that's just not how nonprofits work. And I understand that there are protocols and things you're supposed to take. My impression overall was, you know, from listening to the testimonies of the workers and James's friends on the board, is I heard people who were deeply concerned about him and the future of the organization. I didn't hear vitriol. I didn't hear people who wanted to tear him down. In fact, everyone who spoke complimented him and acknowledged his importance to the organization, all the work that he did, their gratitude towards him. But at the same time, they felt they had to speak on some of these, you know, things that have been happening that made the working environment unbearable for a lot of them. Aside from that, there was also the financial things. And I think those are valid questions. You know, just because you're the CEO of a company and you founded it and it's your brand or whatever, if it's a nonprofit, you don't get to just do whatever you want with the money. There's a reason there's a board of directors organized in the way it is. So, you know, from what my impression was, I think as soon as they stripped James they voted to strip him of his hiring and firing power.
For 30 days.
For 30 days, I think it was 90, right?
I think it was, yeah.
It was 90.
The board deliberated on the time span. I think that by the end of it, they agreed on 90 days as a temporary measure to protect the
employees who testified. You know, they didn't want backlash from that, but they were very clear to him that this was temporary. Whereas for James, I felt like he took it as a slight. He sounded very irritable. And he was mainly very upset that he felt he wasn't allowed to respond to the things he just sat through to listen to. But
when listening to that, did you ever hear or pick up on a time when James tried to respond and was was there ever a blatant, like, James, we don't want to hear you speak?
No, it seemed like the main controversy was because he wanted to only speak with the board and he wanted everyone else who wasn't on the board to leave. Whereas the board felt they needed to keep Dan Strack and I forget who else they had in there, the other employee, because they would end up having to be the ones who would take over James's responsibility if he's put on this temporary leave of absence. So their argument was, well, anything you have to say to us, you should be able to say in front of them as well. So they refused his motion to have that conversation without those workers present. They did not refuse to speak with him, though. That was not, I didn't get that impression at all. They wanted to speak with him.
Yeah.
And then there was a point at the end where James was making motions that just were unsupported by anybody else on the board. You know, he moved to have that, you know, the private conversation basically, and nobody else on the board thought that was a good idea. And so that didn't happen. And from my perspective, that's when James sort of made the decision to take his toys and go home. There was a point where he said, you know, everybody was trying to just be like, look, we're just trying to do it. You know, this is a temporary thing. And James, you know, had his little statement, which it seemed like he had crafted the statement while he was sitting in the meeting. And he goes, I am not willing to lead an organization that does not trust me to lead it with the necessary authority. I will refrain from taking any actions until you all feel like you'd like me to lead again, effective immediately. I'm on a leave of absence from Project Veritas. I will return only once my full authority as CEO is restored. That's what I'm going to do unless you allow me to have a conversation with this board only. And to me, that was when he sort of made the decision you know, well, if I'm not going to get my way and I don't know why he wanted to have a private conversation. It seemed to have to do with the firing of, forgetting his first name, Hinckley.
Barry, yeah.
Yeah, it was like the one guy, you know, Tom O'Hara, he didn't seem to have the authority to fire. Whereas now Hinckley, I believe he did have the authority to fire, but because of the way that the whole situation went down, the board felt that it was more prudent to restore him to the position and sort of just go forward with him there if he wanted the job back, which wasn't clear.
Correct. Barry Hinckley was not an executive of the company, and he was not a board member. So James just being able to fire him was well within his, you know, authority as CEO. But as you said, yeah, what they stated in the audio is that they felt that given the circumstances, it's only right that they try to, you know, offer that back because of how things went down.
So the thing about all of this too is, you know, and we didn't talk about this yet, but Project Veritas is, what is it? A
5013C.
5013 C3, which is a type of nonprofit organization, and they have very specific protocols, correct, and bylaws and ways that this is set up to prevent abuses, you know, not just of staff, but misuse of the money and all that stuff. And when this sort of thing happens, this is part of the protocol. You're supposed to investigate it. And what it seems like is James didn't want any sort of investigation or anything to go any further. I said, sorry, let's just move on from this. I'll have an open door policy from now on. So, you know, talk a bit about his response in regards to that, you know, what he proposed as his solution and why.
Yeah. So in the call, James offered, he wrote an apology letter that he said he would like to send to the staff. Later on February 20th, when James gave sort of this goodbye speech in the office, he told us all that the board would not allow him to send that apology, when, as you heard in the audio, that was not the case. The board said he was well within his right to send whatever he wanted to. And the multiple board members did comment that what he wrote sounded very heartfelt and was a great first step in trying to repair, you know, relations with the staff. However, they need to come up with a better solution, like action solution, because him proposing to have an open door policy was already policy in Project Veritas's employee handbook. So to propose that as a solution to the problem, it couldn't be the solution because it's already a system in place that's failed. So
it was also,
you can't say that's your fix.
Well, it was sort of the origin of the problem too, is that a lot of the staff didn't feel that open door policy existed. They didn't feel comfortable enough coming directly to James with grievances.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why it all, you know, ended up happening in the way it happened, is because that environment didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're saying is that was supposed to be what it was like from the get-go. So you're not offering anything that's some new development or change in the way we're doing things. You're just saying, I'm sorry, I'll continue to, you know, I'll do what I was supposed to be doing in the first place. If I recall, he proposed hiring a chief of staff to help him with management, because some of the criticisms, actually the criticism he was getting from a lot of the workers and from the board, was that they felt he was trying to do too much all at once. He was trying to micromanage. He was trying to, you know, do every little thing. And they're just saying, James, you can delegate more of these things to others so you can focus on what you're good at. And what it seemed like was there was a power struggle there.
Kind of. But so one thing to make very clear here is that this discussion was not a shock to James. And up until this point, it was something that he was actually in favor of. So for a long time, going back to at least summer 2022, we had been talking about ways to free up James's time, because it was clear he was spread too thin. He's obviously the company's best fundraiser because people want to see him. They want to talk to him. And he's the only talent. And so for someone to have to travel constantly to fundraise, be the face people see in videos, and run the operations of the company is too much. And we all empathized very greatly with that. And so from early on, we were thinking of different ways that we can try to, you know, make the company structure a little more streamlined, and in a way that James can just focus on what he wants to do, just focus on the creative, just the stuff that he likes to do. Because the rest of the stuff, the managing people, he hated that. And he admitted that for years. He hated having to deal with that kind of stuff. He knew he wasn't good at it, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's pretty natural in the evolution of a company's growth that inevitably the founder usually takes on a more creative oversight role. Meanwhile, you have, you know, the operational CEOs and whatnot who report to that person, but ultimately, you know, run the company. And, you know, the founder that takes a more creative approach to all that. That's just that happens all the time. That's how businesses grow. If it's always just one top-down structure, the company will never grow. And so this has been in talks for a while. And even in that November, so November 2022, there was, again, this company leadership meeting. Even there, you know, the discussions were had of maybe we should bring multiple talent into Project Veritas. Maybe we should set up, you know, a for-profit and a nonprofit. That way the nonprofit can just do the journalism, and we'll have sort of like a subscription for-profit where we can do the more irreverent music video type stuff. That way, you know, the audience that wants to see that can go see that, but the audience that wants to see the journalism can feel comfortable that PV resources are going just to that. And everybody felt like that's probably, you know, a good way for us to move forward. So none of this is new. If you think about what James did, he literally just did what the board and the executives talked about doing for 6 months prior.
You mean
he just screwed everybody else while he did it.
You mean by founding
OMG, a for-profit thing, yeah, which he needs to raise money for anyway because nobody's subscribing, but that's besides the point. So, you know, we were all very, you know, empathetic to the fact that James was spread way too thin and he wasn't focusing on the things he wanted to focus on. And so the board, I think, saw this as another opportunity to just present to him, we need to find a better way to structure the company. And to be clear, and you guys know because you heard the call, never once was there any discussion about not making James the CEO. There was never any talk about, you know, removing him from his role and all this kind of stuff. It was simply James is in a position that is too central for the point the company was at. It needed to grow, and it needed to grow beyond a singular person. That singular person could be in charge of the vision still. That singular person could, you know, still be the face and the vision for moving forward. But there needed to be some form of operational change. That's all that was discussed. And James just was not having that. And so the discussions in that meeting and, you know, afterwards, he pretended like it was some sort of, or not that, I don't want to frame that, I don't want to characterize anything, but he did not dissuade the illusion people had that there was a coup to remove him from the company. He saw that view out there, and he did not do anything to fix that view, knowing that it was not correct.
So, I mean, at that point, Project, like, this is one of the things I remember is that, you know, Tim Pool of Timcast fame, you know, that he's very well, you know, big fan of James. James has been on the show multiple times. And Tim really went to bat for James, sort of reinforcing this narrative that, you know, James was having the company stolen by the board. I remember specifically that Tim like referred to the company as evil people. He was like, these people are evil. They're like, and so this is like, I primarily like, this is kind of, you know, where that narrative really started and spread from. Well, and I think that was probably largely due to private conversations that Tim was having with James at the time.
Well,
and
also the grievance letter came out around this time, and that was when Tim first started talking about this. So James didn't leave yet. That was on the 20th. When he, you know, leaves. So the board meeting happens. That's on the 6th. The letter comes out. People are starting to talk about it. They're wondering what's going on. And this is one of the criticisms too that maybe you could address that people laid against the company is, you know, they said, why weren't they more transparent about what was happening? And from what I understand, they were trying to save face for James. They wanted to handle it privately.
Internally.
That was the justification. They didn't want to put out there that James was on basically, you know, time out for doing bad things. And they just wanted to not address the fact that, you know, just he's taking some time off. That was their justification at the time.
Well, now, and that was how it came across in the board meeting. I mean, it seemed like he was just going to take, you know, 2 weeks off for his mental health to recoup. And then they would come back and have more conversations about, you know, the organizational changes from that point going forward.
Yeah.
But it seemed like James made a decision after that meeting where he was going to take his toys and go home. And any illusion that he was going to continue was just sort of like something that he sort of just put out there in order to keep his now enemies on the board off balance. Because I feel like after this meeting was when James sort of went into this us versus them perspective of the whole thing. And he started to see
and very early on, he tried to start culling people to support him in that narrative. So February 7th, I sent him a text message and I just said, you know, I don't really know what's going on, but I hope you're okay. And if I can help you at all, just let me know. And so I get home from work. I'm just, you know, doing stuff at home, and I get a phone call from a new number, and it's James. And he says, can you meet me? And I said, of course. He's like, you know, I'll call you back soon with a location. Very, very, you know, secret agent like. He calls me back about an hour later, and we're meeting at a closed bar in White Plains. So very, you know, very secretive. So we meet. I drive over there and I meet him, and it's just the two of us at this table of, you know, this outdoor portion behind a closed bar. And you know, James sits me down and he basically says, you know, I'm sorry if I've done anything that made you feel like you were unappreciated or, you know, not someone that is valued here. He's like, I value you very highly. I've always appreciated how you've shared my vision, even when no one else did. You've always sort of understood what I was trying to do, even when other people in the company wouldn't really, you know, take on that same vision. And I see us as blood brothers, and we will work together again. He kept stressing that line. We will work together again. And I thought that sounded very odd. And so, you know, he told me he's going to go dark for a while and things will probably get crazy, but, you know, when he's ready, he'll reach out to me and, you know, just to try to hang in there. James and I often, I don't want to say often, but I mean, we bonded over our interest in Ayn Rand novels. And so, you know, he sort of referred to this as his, you know, Howard Rourke leaving to go to the mine for a while and just be out of the public eye. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. And so we hugged and I left and I sat in my car for a moment. And from that point on, I knew he wasn't coming back. The way he was saying, we will work together again, I knew he wasn't coming back to Project Veritas.
You knew he didn't mean there, and that was basically him already kind of insinuating like you're going to have a choice to make between me or this, you know, former organization, and you better make that choice, kind of implying that, at least. Was that the last time you saw him?
No, it wasn't. So you know, so this was the Tuesday after the board meeting. The rest of the week went on, and it was insane, and it was hellish because the online backlash was now, you know, just building at this point, that Pfizer bought out the board because of the Jordan Walker story, and now the board wants to get rid of James, and that was all over the internet, and nobody was saying otherwise.
Yeah, I saw a few, you know, theories. The Pfizer one was the big one, but I saw, you know, Matthew Tiermond is running things now, and this was his vendetta against James. Tiermond being one of the board of directors at the time. I saw that they're becoming a propaganda arm to promote Ron DeSantis's.
I saw now anti-Trump, and we're here now to run DeSantis' campaign. I mean, insane stuff. But nobody was saying otherwise. And clearly there were people in the company who were leaking things to promote that idea that, you know, the company is being silent, trying to hide the fact that James is gone and that they all want him gone. That's sort of what the prevailing narrative was. And so the 10th comes around, February 10th, it was the 9th. No, it was the 10th. I'm sorry. It was the 10th. And Dan Strack gets us all on a call just to see how we're all doing and inform us that there has been another board meeting that James refused to go to, and I will give James this, that the board scheduled a follow-up meeting during the 2-week period that he was supposed to be on vacation. And so I do give him that it's like, on one hand, they tell him take a leave of absence. On the other, they're like, okay, we need you at this board meeting. So I do understand there's some sloppiness there for sure. But they scheduled this board meeting to basically have a follow-up discussion, and James didn't show up because he's on his leave of absence. So they hold it without him. And it's at this meeting that they decide that the financial stuff has to be investigated further, because apparently this is an ongoing trend over the past few years, that you know, they were concerned about the IRS and the expensive legal costs that were going on at the time, and it's like, we don't have room to keep doing this kind of thing. So they wanted to investigate that, and they thought that up until that investigation was done, it would probably be best that James took an indefinite leave of absence, is how they phrased it. Basically, you know, until we wrap this up, you know, we don't know how to proceed with James yet.
So really quick about the financial stuff too. You know, I saw a lot of people dismissing those things. Oh, it's no big deal. He should be able to fly as expensive as he wants, or have as many black cars as he wants, or, you know, or downplaying, what was it, the sandwich incident? Like, oh, you know, it's all such silly things. But when it comes to the financial stuff in a nonprofit, and I learned a lot about that by just researching into what happened at Project Veritas that I didn't even know before. But like, the board of directors are all liable for that stuff.
They're all personally liable.
Personally liable. So whether you think the financial stuff is no big deal or not,
criminally liable, right? You can go to jail for doing things wrong with that.
So whether you think how the money is being spent is no big deal, and James should just be able to do what he wants because you personally feel he should, doesn't matter. The point is they are legally bound to take some kind of action and to investigate these things. It's not some unheard of thing. This is how nonprofits are structured.
We should also make the point that, you know, Project Veritas's fundraising was going very, very well up until this point, right? You guys I remember that seeing like a graph at one point, and it was like an exponential curve. Like you guys had a lot of money coming in.
It was a slow climb, but it was doing very well. But we missed the 2022 fundraising target, and James had raised that to, I mean, I wasn't in development, so I don't know the exact numbers, but I know he raised it a few million more than the previous year, which was out of trend for the rest. So that like, it was way too much based on the trend that was going on. And so for a strapped development team, it was basically being set up for failure. And so from a financial standpoint, we were already coming into 2023 with sort of a stressed outlook of that situation. The company was, you know, thankfully, because over the last year, Dan Strack and Tom O'Hara had worked together to cut down on a lot of stuff and actually set budgets for investigation work and approvals for travel and things like that. They were able to build out a runway of funds, but typically, historically, the company never had more than 2 or 3 months worth of funds in the bank at any given time. You know, it was you know, month to month really. So, you know, it was already sort of like a mounting situation financially going into 2023, and this just exasperated it. But we're at February 10th. And the company decides they want to do this investigation and have James be on a leave of absence until that investigation concludes. I believe, for comparison, a very similar situation happened with the CEO of the NRA. You know, they found issues with his spending. They put him on a leave of absence, and then actually the same company that did the investigation in the NRA did the one here at Project Veritas, and so yeah, I guess to them it seems like a standard way of proceeding in a situation like that. And so
also a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation too.
There's no way to win that situation.
Well, you know, so here's the thing. You know, people say, "Oh, well, James is the face. They should have known this was going to all go down south, and donations would dry up as soon as people find out about what's happening. So that's going to kill the organization. How stupid of them." But also an IRS audit could have killed the organization too.
Yeah.
Could have shut it down as well. So what are they supposed to do in that situation?
Yeah. So all of those concerns were on the table. And so, yeah, there was no easy situation. There was no easy decision to make at the time. And so here we are in this February 10th Zoom call where Dan Strack is basically filling us in on what the board just decided. And now the whole company is basically just giving their feedback and trying to ask questions. And it was clear basically at this point that sides were starting to form. A lot of the company, specifically the undercover journalists who did not work at the office and were, you know, out throughout the country, were sort of not teaming up, but yeah, they were grouping up against the employees in the office who signed their names to that letter. Because as of now, the biggest sort of inflammatory thing that got out was the employee letter and people making it seem like some coup happened, you know. So that is happening. You have certain people in supposed positions of leadership at Project Veritas saying that even if they know what's true, they're not going to say that publicly because they need to protect their brand. That brand being not going against James and being in good graces with the rest of the right-wing movement. So the whole company was starting to feel that pressure, and it wasn't tearing itself apart quite yet, but you know, there was extreme uneasiness within the staff. And so we go into the next week, the second week of James's, you know, time off, and it just gets worse. Some of my colleagues started to answer on Twitter to, you know, people who were saying things, and James would start to text me these responses in a way that inferred that this is supposed to be like indicative of people I should not be associating with or something like that. Colleagues who would answer back at conservative influencers saying, you know, you don't know the story and stuff like that. And so it was crazy. And at one point I texted James again saying, you know, I'm trying to keep the ship going. I'm trying to keep us moving, and it just feels in vain. Everyone's starting to tear themselves apart now, and I don't know what to do. And he calls me later that day, or I think the next day. I'm in the gym. I think this is Wednesday. Wednesday before his February 20th speech. And so the 15th. And so I'm in the gym. He calls me and he's like, how you doing? How's everything going? And the way he was asking me that, I got the impression he was looking for me to go on about how terrible it is. Like, how's it going, right? You know, like that kind of thing. So I'm telling him like, it's tough. Everybody's really, you know, morale is zero. A lot of people aren't even coming to the office. The comms team is just, you know, extraordinarily depressed because they're the ones seeing these horrible comments about all of us Project Veritas staff every day. And, you know, we put out releases and everybody just trashes it, and we don't know what to do. And it was in this phone call that James basically told me it was time for me to pick a side. And I told him that I don't see this as a situation that needs to have sides. I told him I'm here for the mission, and the mission should include both James and Project Veritas together. I think that we can find a better way to do things together, but there's no reason why we need to consider this a situation where there are sides. And he just said something along the lines of, you know, well, if that's the way you feel. And he told me that he was going to drop an ultimatum on the board. He would not elaborate on what that was, but he let me know that, you know, it was going to happen and it would really amp things up. So I said, okay. And we hung up. And it was the next day that I learned from Dan Strack that James basically wrote to the board that either they reinstate him or not reinstate him, either the whole...
They resign, right?
Either the whole board and all officers resign, or James leaves. That's what it was.
So what you're telling me is he wasn't fired.
James was not at the time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just to clarify that.
Yeah.
Again.
He was not ousted. I will be clear. James O'Keefe was not ousted from Project Veritas in any way. There was not a single person there who did not want James at the company. The entire board were people that he knew for decades. They were all personally picked by James. There was no coup to take him out of the company. And so the board and the officers obviously didn't do that because, firstly, legally, the nonprofit can't operate without a full board. In New York State, you have to have at least 3 board members. I think James may have had people he knew lined up to take those positions, but it's like they just would have been yes men. So the board said, no, that's not the way we handle this. That's not in the best interest of James. That's not in the best interest of the company. We have to figure this out. That gets us to Monday the 20th. So the night before, James texts me and asks me to be in the office. Monday, February 20th is President's Day and the office is closed, holiday. So nobody was planning on being there. James asked me to be there, so I told him, yeah, I'll come in. So I go in, and a small handful of people are there, clearly all asked to be there by James or, you know, other people working with James. Undercover journalists flew in for this, so money was spent on this. Company money was spent on this. They were recording blatantly, no one had like undercover cameras, but they're literally walking around with their phones. People recording, people were excited. Obviously, there was a group of people that knew what was happening and a group of people that didn't. And so I show up, I go to our production manager, and he helped. He also ran the department and basically oversaw the gear and all that. And James asked us to set up the cameras because he said he was going to say something and he wanted it recorded. So the two of us go into his office and we set up the camera. And everybody else files in, and eventually James goes in. And so I'm standing right next to the lens of the camera, right off camera, as James gives his February 20th speech that I'm sure everybody by now has seen. And it was throughout that speech that I steadily had it affirmed in my mind that the way James is going about this is wrong. And he said several things in that, and I had to stop myself so badly to not yell out in that room and correct him on things, because he was saying things that were either blatantly untrue or such extreme hyperbole that it was just short of being a blatant lie.
What were some of the inaccuracies?
So, well, one of the biggest one was saying that the board forbade him from reaching out to the staff with an apology letter. James could have done that at any time. The board was very clear in that call that you guys heard that he could do that at any time, and he chose not to do that. And then, he brought up other instances and did not share the whole story with the people watching about those instances. So the stupid black car thing, going off in the meeting about, why does the color of the car matter? It's like, James, they're referring to a luxury service, a luxury car service. That's what they're talking about.
They're referring to the price.
Yeah, and he pretends that he didn't. Another one would be, the company is saying that they had to spend money on a venue where I was getting married. Well, I'm not married. When in actuality, you were supposed to be married 2 years ago, and you didn't. That's your reason. I don't need to talk about that, but you didn't get married, and you had put down a deposit on a venue. You didn't want to lose that deposit, and so you had Project Veritas hold their company Christmas party at the place so that they could then reimburse you the money for that. So that's what I'm saying. There were just so many instances where he didn't go over the full truth that framed the whole thing in a way that everybody was out to get him.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, the one thing that really caught my attention was how many times he reiterated that this is just for the staff. This is just for
that. I knew during that call that was not going to be just for staff. The amount of times he said, and this is just a message to my staff. He said it multiple times. Clearly, and I'm sorry, James, he's a terrible actor. He's not a good actor. I mean, even his April 1st thing that he just put out, you knew from the moment it started what he was going to do. It's like, he's not there yet. All right. So you can't.
That might be the remark that pisses him off the most.
That's what's going to get people on me. But it's like, you're not a great actor.
Is that a new thing? Because I don't think I even know what you're talking about.
Oh, his April 1st thing?
From this April.
Oh, yeah. He did some April Fool's thing, basically just saying, the pressures are too hard and making it sound like he's about to quit, basically. Yeah. It was some corny, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I just haven't really paid much attention to him since the end of Project Veritas. I've seen a little bit.
Twitter. So I only know this stuff because people, like, I get sent things like, hey, did you see this? I'm not in any of those circles anymore, and I'm very thankful for that. So yeah, just that whole thing was a farce. And so that was the last time that I saw James. And so
the other red flag with that video was that it was literally on Timcast like hours after you guys
well, 10 minutes it was online within like 10 minutes.
Just wait. So the recording ends and the production manager goes back into the studio room at the office to start editing it because James wanted all of his documents and everything in there. So they do that, and I'm not sticking around for this. So I get ready to leave, and James is with this little group of journalists who are clearly his posse now, picking up things in the office and putting them in a little box. And James keeps stressing, almost in this almost as if he was trying to play up the absurdity for his own, looking pathetic. But he's like, oh, I can only take what fits in my little white Kia. It's like, come on. Like, there's nothing in this office you need to take, but you're putting on a show for people. So, yeah, he put on his show. He got a little box. He put, books and things in a box to go into his little white Kia.
Literally taking his toys to go home.
Like, yeah. And I forget what I said to him, but I was like, I'll be in touch, or, let me. And he didn't get this. But he made one more Ayn Rand reference, and he said something like, just moving forward like Howard Rourke. And I said, no, I think more like John Galt, because John Galt destroyed the world. And he was like, oh no, Howard Rourke. So yeah, he didn't get that. So I went and said goodbye to our production manager, and I left. And so before that video went out, it was being shown in the production room. And so at Project Veritas, we used Vimeo as our sort of review page. So once we cut something, we put it on like a private Vimeo page. That's where we got our reviews from. People could make notes. And then, once the final version is set, it goes out. So the production manager is showing James the link on Vimeo. James saw that the video was titled in Vimeo, James' Resignation. And James got upset and made him change it. Now, a Vimeo link, if you are in the company, only the people in the company see that, right? Because that's not getting published out. So why should it matter what the title of the video is for an internal video? So ask yourselves that question. The video gets sent to the Project Veritas team, and within 20 minutes, it's on Tim Pool. Tim Pool basically got the Vimeo link and uploaded it on his own site, and it's still there. You can go on Tim Pool's YouTube, and you can see that he uploaded that. James then took that Tim Pool YouTube link and texted that out to his whole contact list saying, hey, watch this. So it was no longer a private video. He was treating it like it was a Project Veritas release.
Yeah, because and it seems like it was never intended truly to be.
And that's exactly what we would do. So every time we would release a video, James would get the link, the comms team would help him write a text message, and he would blast that to his contact list, since he has, important people in his contact list, to help distribution of the story. He just did that exact same thing with this private internal video. So that was when I was, there was no illusion anymore that everything was happening as James wanted it to. And he wanted Project Veritas to fail.
So it seems like he also wanted to lean into painting this martyr narrative, which, goes along with the
he can't help it. James is a martyr in everything he does. James is the second coming of Christ. He has compared himself to Jesus Christ. He's compared himself to Steve Jobs. He's compared himself to, like I said, I had a good relationship with James when I was there, and it really, all of this really tore me up. when it happened, because I really thought that, you know, we understood each other in a way. But as more of this unfolded and I saw, you know, James start OMG and the things that happened there, the more I was just like, come on, like, you're better than this. But
or maybe he isn't.
Or maybe he isn't. I don't know. Yeah, maybe he actually isn't. But yeah, James knows how to play the martyr game. If you go after him, it's everybody's after him. If you don't go after him, it's like, yeah, it's there's no.
So that brings us to OMG. You know, James leaves, takes his stuff, goes. The video gets out there. All the influencers and all this stuff, they're all now talking about it.
Yeah.
And for the most part, everyone is not questioning his side of things. They're just accepting with what he says. And this was something too that you had talked to me about before. But you said there were open lines of communication between Project Veritas staff and people like Tim Pool and Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and these other notable.
Oh yeah, there were. I've met Charlie Kirk. I've met Tim Pool. I've actually like accidentally been on the stream in Tim Pool. You can catch me behind Luke at one point, you know, because I was so. But there were open lines of communication with these people, and they absolutely refused to hear any version of the story outside of what James put out. James is the face. James is the golden boy. James is, you know, the reason it exists. And so we cannot go against him. And if people at Project Veritas remain, they are outcasts. You know, they have betrayed him. They are all Benedict Arnolds. And so, and that was the most difficult thing now during this period, that once James's sort of goodbye video was out, the narrative really became that if you left with James, you were brave, you were a hero. And if you did not go with James, then you were just dragged through the mud as, you know, a betrayer, as, you know, someone over the downfall of the entire conservative movement, and yeah, just scummy, evil people looking to undermine, you know, the success of America or something. So, and it was tough. And so,
from what I understand, though, the majority of staff did remain at Project Veritas.
The majority of staff did remain.
There were only a few people who did end up going with him, and one of the people who remained with Project Veritas was Christian Hartsock, who was one of the journalists who was working with James from the very beginning, from day one.
Yeah.
So, and I thought, you know, that those were some of the things that definitely indicated to me, like, okay, there's like more to this, clearly, because why would these people all stay? Why didn't they all just follow him if they, you know, if what he's saying is true and the allegations are false, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, you know, I worked with Christian a few times, but, you know, he lived on the West Coast, so he wasn't at the office very often, and he wasn't involved in any of this up to this point. Like, he obviously wasn't part of the letter, you know, he wasn't part of a lot of this, you know, and I know that James reached out to him too, to try to get him to leave. And Christian took a very balanced approach, and I personally also found it very telling that, you know, someone like Christian, who's known James literally since the beginning, Christian who knew Andrew Breitbart, who was basically tasked by Andrew Breitbart to look out for James because they knew early on that James has a problem with yes men, and, you know, he can sometimes be his own worst enemy. Someone like Christian, who was there for all of that history, that didn't go. So that was very telling to me. But it was tough. And so it was because of that, late February, early March, I wrote basically my last plea to James. I was trying to think of what we could do, because we still had releases planned. Like, we were still working. A lot of people weren't coming into the office, but myself, executive producer Pam Brown, a small handful of other people just kept coming in, because we were like, we can't just fold. We can't just sit home and cry about it. We have to keep this shit moving. So we got releases out, even if they were trashed by the audience. And so I wrote this letter that I intended to be sort of a last plea to both James and the audience. And I read it to the company in a meeting, and I was like, I'm going to produce this. And so, you know, we kind of, and a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, the journalists who were working with James didn't think we should put it out, but we ended up putting it out. And we recorded it in the office, and it basically was meant to set the record straight for the audience that we as the staff were put into this situation. We don't like this situation, but we have to deal with this situation. And we owe it to our audience to continue Project Veritas because it's still operating on donor funds. We owe it to our audience to get these stories out, even if they want to trash us on Twitter, because we were putting out important stories at the time. The stuff we were putting out was actually getting like local cover. Like the stuff we were putting out would have historically hit every metric of a Project Veritas success. It was just not hitting the metric on Twitter, which now was the only thing that mattered to anybody.
Yeah, I thought the gender clinic investigation was pretty.
It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, and the journalists who worked on that, they were incredible. The amount of research and just thought out development that went into that was amazing. And so, you know, we were like, we have to keep this kind of stuff going. So I wrote this letter. We produced it as a video. We put it out. Obviously, it gets trashed. I get no response from James. The only response I do get is randos on Twitter telling me, or posting that it sounds like the video has an AI voice.
I remember that.
My voice sounds like an AI voice, but
I remember those comments.
Sorry, I'm real. Sorry, Amuse. I'm real. But yeah. So yeah, that happens. So
the other thing too that I wanted to bring up is the whistleblowers and how the whistleblowers responded to the situation, because they were sort of divided as well, although most of them, I believe, kind of congregated around
James. They
James.
all kind of stuck together on the pro James stance. Yeah. So as everybody knows, late March came around. Debbie Bernal came on stage with James at CPAC. Surprise! I wonder if she got her payment for a lawyer now that he's not a 501c3. We can speculate on that. But she came out. She was again a martyr for society because she worked for a contractor that worked for Pfizer, and she got scared, and so her story now means the world. And so she came out, and the rest of the insiders over the past 2 years all banded together with James. And at Project Veritas, we tried to keep communication and a relationship going with them as much as possible. And so I believe there were several phone calls, but at least one group Zoom call in particular that I know of, where Dan Strack and a few other members of the staff that worked directly with the insiders got together just to let them speak, to let them air their concerns, air their frustrations, and basically try to reassure them that, we're still doing our thing and we want James to come back and we're trying to figure this out still. Mm-hmm. And so they did that. And one of the more notorious insiders, Ivory Hecker, later released the recording of that call like she was blowing the whistle on Project Veritas, like she's an insider now releasing this phone call of all the insiders talking about how upset they are that James is gone. Well, she never let her audience know that she clipped out the part of the meeting where she herself said that James is a monster and, he's treated her horribly. And you can listen to that audio too. She clipped that out of her release.
We will include that audio in the file dump associated with
yeah.
this.
Sorry. it was just so frustrating to see these people that, and I worked on Ivory's release.
Yeah.
I had to dote on that ridiculous woman for like days when she was at our office because she was so freaked out. And like Project Veritas staff had to put together interviews for her and shoot things for her.
So ultimately, her private opinion of James was diametric to how she immediately reacted to this. I don't know where her position is now. I think she's like criticizing him now all of a sudden.
Well, because there was history there, and we don't need to go into it. Basically, she thought she was being muzzled by Project Veritas because she thought that the Murdoch family was directly muzzling her at Fox. It's really quite crazy. But yeah, so that was this whole spiel of her story. But the rest of the insiders as well, people that we worked closely with, people who knew me, people who knew, the staff that, put together these events where they were showcased, completely turned their backs on all of us. And that was a really, that hurt a lot. People that you just thought you were close with that, took the popular stance because that's what worked on social media. And then they would all give their hot takes on the situation publicly and get all the clout from standing up for James in this PV James debacle.
Yeah. Well, James, he has the numbers and the attention. He was the face of the company, and he clearly understood that and how he could use that to his advantage. He knew that if he got his side of things out, or how he wanted to portray things, at least, that before the truth caught up, that would be the first impression that got out there. And as long as he got ahead of it first, which would explain the leaks and all of that and the way everything went down.
Yeah.
Hold on, guys. 1 second. We're back.
All right, quick break. We're back. Not parched anymore. Definitely Kalen, because he's been talking a lot. So we will kick back off with, all right, so your last communication that you had with James before that was that, and he cut you off.
Yeah, so we're now in mid-March. And so, as I was saying before, Debbie Bernal has gone on stage at CPAC. The rest of the insiders, Project Veritas insiders, are sort of, speaking out against Project Veritas at this point as well. I wrote this video hoping to, reach out to James and the audience in a meaningful way. Doesn't reach out to me. And about a week or so goes by, and we find out that sadly, one of the undercover journalists who worked with us for a very short, he was only with us for a few months, but he was sick for a while, and he died of cancer. And so we were informed of that, and obviously everybody was really, really upset about that. A really great guy, really dedicated, enthusiastic, really wanted to be part of what Project Veritas was, and he just came in at the worst time. And so I texted James, and I told him, I don't know if anybody's reached out to you yet, but I feel like you deserve to know that so-and-so just passed away. We're going to reach out to his family and, try to send something to him, but I felt like you deserve to know. A day later, James texts me back saying, "Thank you for letting me know, but if you really meant what you said, you'd be on my team."
And by meant what you said, what did he mean by that?
So
in the video, meant what you said in the video?
In the video, yeah. Okay. So the day we released the video, I texted James, I meant everything I said.
Gotcha.
Thinking he would watch it. He never responded to that. That was the last text message I sent to him prior to this one.
Okay.
So he was basically responding to both.
Okay.
And so that's when I was like, oh, okay, all right. So then I send back a very lengthy response. I couldn't help, but I had all these thoughts that I just had to get out there. And I basically told him, I'm sorry you see it that way, but we both know that it's not in my best interest to stay at Project Veritas. Everybody who left with you has a new job. They're getting paid. They're being praised across social media as the heroes who stood by James O'Keefe, while all of us who stayed are basically being completely dragged through the mud. And we know that there is an end, whether it's in a month or 6 months, we know that it's coming to an end. So no, it was not the easy decision to stay at Project Veritas. In fact, it would have been very easy to leave with OMG. And so it's not in my best interest, but it's what I feel is right. And it's what my integrity guides me to believe is right. And so we kind of trade some words, and I end off with telling him, I'm going to stand up for what I think is true. You know what you're saying. A lot of it is not as you are presenting it to be. But I'm not your enemy, and I never will be. I think that's the last thing I texted him, and he never answered that. And I don't intend to be. Like I said at the beginning of this, I'm not out on some vendetta to destroy James. But it's obvious that there is a certain side to this whole story that has not been told. I hope I've been level-headed and brought it together in a way that's cohesive, but a way for people to understand just what was happening with those of us who were behind the scenes while it was happening. And if you want to think about it this way, I have just as much credibility, if not more so, as the people James is capturing on gay dates now telling you that the government's bad.
That is true.
Because of their access. If you doubt what I'm saying or think that I have some nefarious intention, I have just as much credibility as those people do. So take that with what you will. And
a cache of receipts to go along.
And a cache of receipts that helps also.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to take a level-headed position, and that's what we wanted to do too. Ultimately, I've criticized him online after all this went down, just having some idea of how it was affecting the staff, and that it wasn't exactly how he was portraying it, but it was never like, oh, let's just rip this guy down. It's no, this guy is not above criticism just because you like him and he's famous and you like some of the work he does, etc. That does not mean he is infallible, that he can't make mistakes, that he can't misuse money, that he can't mistreat people. And what I got tired of, and the reason why Brent and I started to defend the staff and to criticize him, is because we don't agree with that sort of idol worship of people. Like, no one is above criticism, and it doesn't matter how much
anything that I can comment on. I like to think that up to this point I haven't been commenting on anything. I've just been relaying experiences. But if I can comment on anything, I look back at this whole situation and I really do feel like it's emblematic of the cult worship that has completely taken over the sort of right-wing movement as a whole, and how we always rip on the left for never talking bad about their guys, and the media upholding them no matter what. But the right has their golden calves also. They have their people that you cannot speak against, and even if they do something wrong, you stand by them because we're in a war and we have to win. Like, we've had people tell us that. Like, these people know that there are issues with James, but they choose not to say anything because it's in their best interest in the social media platforms. And it's just really unfortunate to see. This whole thing was really blackpilling to a lot of us who were Project Veritas staff, because we believed in this mission, and we were not activists. We just wanted to get the truth out there, and in meaningful ways. And it just seems like at the end of the day, the audience was not interested in the truth that we were putting out. They were interested in what face was telling them that.
Yeah.
And it was about the fame and the intrigue of that whole sphere. It wasn't actually about the content moving change. And so that's what a lot of us came out of this with.
Which is quite disheartening. I'm sure anyone can agree that losing an organization like Project Veritas, whether you agree with the honeypot methodologies or not, you know, we lost something unique that was valuable and was contributing, you know, and a lot of people said that if you go back and you know, anyone watching this, go listen to the board meeting in which the staff were giving testimony and talking about the grievances. They all said that they, for the most part, besides the grievances, loved the company, wanted to be a part of it, were really adamant about the mission, that it was unique, that no one else was doing it, and that they wanted to see it thrive. They wanted.
I've never worked anywhere where the staff was so dedicated to their jobs. I mean, there was not a person that you couldn't call at 2 a.m. that would answer and get to work because something had to get done. I mean, the people that made up this team were some of the most dedicated and talented individuals that I have ever worked with. And the amount to which that they cared about what they did, I mean, it was insane. You had to be insane because the hours were crazy. The travel was crazy. The demands were nonstop. You had to be a little crazy to work there.
Yeah. But I think, you know, he had to have known that too. He clearly knew your value as an employee. He tried to get you on board. He wanted to bring you in there. And, you know, having worked with you on a short film set before, what I can say is that, you know, you create one of the most organized and professional environments that I've witnessed personally when I was a part of it. And it is interesting, you know, knowing casual Kalen like this, but having seen producer Kalen at work, it was very clear to me why James wanted you and to bring you onto OMG and all of that, because he knew your value. He knew how seriously you took everything. And he also knows you don't care about the spotlight. That's not your thing. And that's what makes a good producer. You've told me this before too, is, you know that your position is kind of in the background. And as long as everything is working the way it should, you don't hear anything. And even if you don't get praise, that's still good because it, you know, everything worked the way it should have and you got it done.
If something is running smoothly, you don't hear a word, but if one thing is out of place, you hear about it nonstop. And that's what the job is.
Yeah.
You know, you handle fires in the background so that the people on stage or the people in front of the camera don't understand that you're basically like holding the walls together with rope so that the thing happens. But as long as you get the shot, as long as it looked good, that's the job, you know, accomplished. And so, yeah, I mean, basically every single thing that Project Veritas has done in the last 2 years, I was right behind the camera for. And, you know, I still consider myself extremely lucky for that. I mean, that was definitely, that was the best job that I've had up to that point. You know, James created a stressful environment at times, but I mean, I've worked with live TV and movies and stuff, so I think I was maybe a little more accustomed to that than some other people were. But I thought it was great. You know, everybody I worked with, my time with James, for the most part, was always good. You know, we had our tense moments very rarely, but for the most part, we worked together very well. We got together, I mean, we got along very well. I mean, we'd go to the gym together. I'd be, you know, with him, you know, on boat trips on the weekends. I mean, we hung out. And so when this happened, it was extremely sad. And it was sort of disheartening because, you know, throwing in another Ayn Rand reference, you know, he kept referring to himself as, you know, Howard Roark from the Fountainhead through all this. And now I just see him as Gail Wynand, who is sort of the antithesis of Howard Roark and the, you know, the anti-hero who was an extraordinarily talented individual who had the same drive and individualistic passion for making something happen, but basically sold out to the masses and lost his integrity and basically said, you know, I'm going to give these people what they want to see, no matter how garbage it is. And that those are there are two characters in this novel, but that's who I see James as now.
I kind of view the situation as it's like you know, a parent who doesn't want to let their child grow up and become its own, have its own identity and become its own person. You know, Project Veritas was this child. He gave birth to it. He nurtured it. And then it grew. And then as the child grows, you're supposed to have more and more distance and independence from the parents. And I think that's what Project Veritas needed, more of that, and needed to be allowed to grow. And I think he needed to acknowledge more the work that was being done by all those people, like you said, holding the walls up and holding all of it up. And instead of just acting like, well, I did the work, I created the company, it's my baby. It's like, that stifles it. And from what I heard from the board meeting, I heard people pleading with this man desperately, who really truly cared about the organization. They wanted to see that child grow and prosper and flourish. And they felt he was now clinging to it desperately, trying to control every little aspect of it instead of just letting it go and letting some of that stuff be delegated toward others, which, like you said, that was already being talked about.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't have been a shock to him that the firing and all of that eventually culminated into these things finally being addressed in that way.
This whole thing still boils down to a battle of egos, James's ego, and I think in some sense the board's ego, because again, this is personal for them, not only from a business standpoint, but they also know James better than most people do anywhere. And so this was a personal thing for them to try to figure out. And I kind of joked with Dan Strack and a few others from the very beginning, but I mean, I feel like I'm stuck in the Trojan War, and you have the rage of James that's bent on seeing the company just be destroyed because they would not, give him the honor he thinks that he deserves, no matter how many lives that it costs. And then you have the, board who is just unrelenting and trying to do what they need to do to keep Project Veritas alive. And then you had all of us in the middle. And you had the handful that went with James, but you had the rest of us who basically knew that Troy was going to burn. We knew that there was an end, but it still felt more honorable, and it still felt like there was more integrity in sticking with our values and sticking with the mission and keeping those things moving, even if we knew we were going to die in the end, rather than either just shrink away, quit, or join him for the sake of public praise and job security.
So, bringing us to
and even Achilles learned at the end of the Iliad that his rage was unwarranted, that he thought he was a god and that he could have this unending rage. But in the end, he realized that he's not a god. He's mortal, and his reaction to these situations has to be more level-headed. But we haven't seen that reaction yet.
So, and then this kind of brings us to the end of your time at Project Veritas. So let's talk about the last few months that happened there. You guys brought on a new CEO, Hannah Giles, and then the remaining staff eventually gets gutted, the entire production team and stuff. So talk about the end. How did Hannah come into the picture, and why did all of that play out the way it did?
I sort of forget about this whole chapter because Hannah Giles as a person is just so forgettable. But basically this happened because we knew that we needed a new face. We knew that we needed somebody that the public could trust again, that we could put into our videos, that, would give us a shred of, relevance again, that, someone that would be able to show the audience, not only are we still doing our thing, but we're still working with people that you like, basically. That was the intention. And so Hannah Giles's name came into the mix, and several people were in contact with her, some board members. Christian Hartsock has been a friend of hers, all throughout this time. For anyone who doesn't know, Hannah Giles was the one who did the first Acorn video with James. It was actually her idea. She's the one who, conceptualized it and wanted to do it. And so we thought that could be a good fit. It goes right back to the origins, to the very beginning. and it's basically like flipping the coin and seeing the other face that was involved in that, and starting from there. And so weeks of deliberation were had with Hannah. I wasn't in on these conversations, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much, but I know that there was, debate about how involved she would be, whether she would just be a face, whether she would, be like a journalist's contractor, sort of consultant to help, or she would have an actual company role. And by mid-May, by the start of June, it was figured out that Hannah would become the CEO. Now, there was a lot of shakeup about this, and I was on vacation. I was actually overseas for the entire month of May. So all this is happening while I'm not even there. But while I'm gone, Hannah Giles is announced CEO. Dan Strack resigns as Chief Operating Officer, and we're now in this new reality of having someone in charge of the company. So I come back, and we still have our releases as scheduled. I manage the release calendar and sort of our look ahead for stories we had to develop. And Hannah was for the most part uninvolved. She lived in Texas, and she had to move her family and she lived at a donor's property in New York. So she would come to the office very rarely, and we just show her stuff and have her sign off on it. But she wasn't really a presence. We actually had to convince her to start being in videos because she didn't want to be in videos, and that was the whole point of this to begin with. We finally get her in videos, and I could find a woman walking outside of ShopRite who would have more of a presence than Hannah Giles did. I mean, the most forgettable wooden personality you could ever imagine. I mean, the amount of takes it would take to have her say, "Be brave, do something." I mean, I'm sure we still have that somewhere, but we were there for an hour. And so we all had, we tried to keep positive, and okay, yes, maybe it's been a while since she was in front of the camera, and we can train her up, and we'll refine her look, and we'll get her there. That was our attitude at the time. Not criticize, but build her up. And so we did. And every video was just worse and worse that she was a part of. And the more she became involved in wanting to, dictate releases, the more that we were like, this woman has no clue what she's doing. I mean, I remember one of our undercover journalists got this. It was actually great. So this was the week that the Supreme Court was deliberating on the constitutionality of Biden's student debt relief, forgiving the student debt. One of our undercover journalists had one of these dates with someone who basically, told her that he worked in a government organization that, works directly with the Biden administration. And they knew what the next steps were because they already anticipated the Supreme Court to strike that down. So the Biden admin was already conceptualizing the next steps. And he sort of elaborated on some of that with her. And we were like, this is actually really great and newsworthy. Hannah didn't want us to put it out because the guy was black, and she said she got feedback that Project Veritas was attacking black people.
What a woke response.
And all of us in the production room were silent. We were literally silent for a few seconds because we were all like, where the hell did this come from? And this video, this was in deliberation for a week. And finally, by the end, Christian was a big part of, just being like, Hannah, we have to put this out. Like, it's produced, it looks great, it's well thought out, it's researched. We just have to put it out. And finally, she let us. But it was absurd. It was absolutely absurd. And then the next thing she wanted to do was this China documents thing. Now, all throughout the time when Hannah was sort of now running thing, she would always talk about how she's got like generals and, you know, sources all over the place sending her like top secret information. And so the China docs were one of them. You know, her source sent her this document dump from the CCP, a leaked server, and she doesn't know what to do with them, but all the documents are in Chinese, and so we have to decipher them and find, you know, what the CCP is doing, and it's going to be a huge story. She's got journalists on the mainland China that are just waiting to put this out once we release it. And we're like, okay. So we start going through it. It's a bunch of like PowerPoints from 2 years prior about like juicers and like different pitch decks for private companies making like product pitches. And Hannah's sort of thought was, well, you know, this is all part of the CCP's scheme to be, you know, to militarize private, you know, innovation and all that kind of stuff. Which I'm not denying there's a point there. There is. But these documents came from a publicly accessible server somewhere. Like one of our comms guys Googled one of them and found everything. I mean, it was all publicly accessible. We're not breaking anything. None of us knew what the story was because there was no story. It was just this pile of random Chinese documents that meant nothing. And Hannah insisted that we put it out. And so we came up with this overly produced, effects-heavy video that basically is just Hannah talking about why these documents are important, telling people, like, go research this stuff and break the story. It was absolutely obscene. And so there was a ton of internal debate, like, Hannah, this is stupid. We shouldn't do this. She was telling us that generals in China were being executed over this information. Okay, Hannah told us that in a company meeting. I mean, it was crazy. It was really crazy. And so this is bringing us into like late July, early August. And this is when the firings are starting to happen.
Well, before the firing, because I do want to highlight it just because it's an important piece of information. But while Hannah was there, I would say probably the most important thing you guys put out was the recorded phone conversation with Ashley Biden, who called saying, hey, I heard you guys have my stuff, which basically verified that the diary was indeed hers. You guys had that in the wings and never released it. And it was just one of the things that you went and fell back on to get something out, right?
Yeah, so Hannah made the call to put that out. She said James was very upset about the fact that we released that. Allegedly, she was in contact with James, you know, a lot during that period of time. They did have to meet in court, you know, a few times over ongoing PV lawsuits that were happening for unrelated things.
Yeah.
So they were in contact. She says he was upset about it, but basically this was a recut version of the Ashley Biden diary video that was not released in 2020. And because of the FBI raids and everything going on, and I believe at the time the subject was back in the news also because the two from Florida were going through their court cases. They thought that it would be a good fundraising tool to basically bring that back and be like, here it is, what you've never seen before, the call that verifies the diary is real. And so I recut it. I worked on that, and Pam Brown and I put that together. We got it going, and we put it out, and it obviously did nothing. Nobody cared. So
yeah, because they were already angry at the organization and were, you know, believing this these rumors that the coup happened and they betrayed James and all that, which is a shame because, you know, their feelings about that based totally on misconceptions. You know,
well, Project Veritas' audience is gone. It was gone at this point, and that's at this point, Hannah had already fired Eric Spracklin and Mario Balaban, the head of comms. She had already fired them.
Well, that reminds me, because I did want to bring this up as well, and it's important and relevant, and it was brought up in that board meeting, you know, in the grievances against James, and it's the polygraph incident. You want to go over that really quick just to get that in here?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't part of any of that, so I really can't speak on any authority with that. But I do know that when the leaks about you know, the Ashley Biden diary happened from Project Veritas in 2020. Somebody leaked pages of the diary so this other outlet could publish them. When that happened, apparently there was such fury in the Project Veritas office that certain individuals were polygraphed over that incident and whether they were the moles, basically. And Eric Spracklin and Eric Cochran were two of the people involved in that. I wasn't there. I know that from Eric Spracklin. You're more than welcome to ask him about it, but that's what I learned about that. And I know that was a ill-received request.
Yeah, well, according to one of the staff members' testimony in the board meeting audio, it was the reason Cochran had parted with the company.
I don't know Eric's reasons, but I definitely think it's maybe a part of it. Yeah. Okay.
So, you know, Hannah guts the rest of the staff. That's where we are. And this is kind of the end of your time.
Yeah. So we're early August, and we're planning out our releases for the rest of the month. We have a meeting all together because now we knew that we were running low on funds. When James left, Project Veritas had just like about $6.5 million in the bank of runway left. If you listen to James now, he'll tell you it's 10. Over the summer, he told you it was 8. His number keeps going up, but we had just over $6 million in the bank to last us. And for a company like ours, they really didn't want to do any layoffs or anything, and so a lot of that went to payroll. And the journalists who were still doing investigations all throughout that year. I mean, James, no, those are expensive, and we basically have no fundraising coming in. So, yeah, that's going to hurt. So we get to August, we're about 6 months down the line, and we know we're running low. And to our understanding, if we were not to lay anybody off, and if we were to have no fundraising happen whatsoever, we can basically last with the whole team up through October. That's what we were told. And now we're getting to the beginning of August. And so, you know, we had a company meeting, or, you know, a team leadership meeting. And I stressed to Hannah, I was like, we need to, if we're going to get to a point where we have to start, you know, rolling people off, we have to give them notice. There's no reason we can't give people at least a month notice or something. And she agreed, the board agreed, they all were like, yes, if we were to get to that point, we would absolutely give everybody notice. 2 days later, they had their first round of layoffs, and it was immediate. Pam Brown, the executive producer, and a few others were, you know, laid off that day. And there is speculation. I mean, the people that were laid off were people that butted heads frequently with Hannah on her direction for things. So there's obviously speculation on why those people were chosen. I can't speak to that, but we have often wondered why those choices were made, because they didn't make any sense. And so now here we are. I'm now basically running the production department entirely. And we're just trying to figure things out. Now, a week later, we learn there's going to be another round of layoffs. And by the end of the day, 18 of us are called into the conference room. Some people on a Zoom call, where the HR director tells us that if we're present, we're all laid off. We're all fired. Hannah was not present for this. None of us spoke to Hannah. None of us heard from Hannah. She didn't show her face for any of this. And all of production was gone at the time. All of comms. All that was left was basically HR, IT, some of fundraising, and a small handful of undercover journalists who basically told Hannah they would help with fundraising. But all operations were pretty much done.
Yeah, and I remember the social media response to that was just like, well, good for them. They all deserve it. They all betrayed James. They're all a bunch of traitors. They got what was coming to them.
And, you know, again, this I can't verify, but from, you know, contacts that we have from people who left OMG, we heard that when all that happened, James was ecstatic that we were all being fired. And if you as a staff member were not ecstatic, then that was weird.
That's
because the evil naysayers were being vanquished, as James would think of it. And when you think about it, all the Project Veritas people who left to go to OMG ended up basically leaving OMG around the same time anyway. So it's not like they got any more runway than we did. So that's a whole other side of the story. But yeah, it was crazy. You know, from the moment OMG started, the #1 goal was to destroy Project Veritas. I mean, James sent Alex Stein to the office to try to get us to, try to get everybody riled up. Justin Leslie was actually Alex Stein's driver, driving a van. We got that on video.
So this leads us right into that, which I guess will be one of the last things we talk about. Wow, we've been going almost 3 hours, but got to get the truth out there. Yeah. So Justin Leslie was one of the journalists hired later toward the end of Project Veritas. Well, no, within the last couple of years. So he was kind of new, and he started off
2021, I believe.
2021. So, and he started off as a Pfizer whistleblower, or at least that was, why he joined Pfizer. He says that was his intention, was to blow the whistle, contacted you guys, etc. And he's one of the people who ended up leaving Project Veritas and joining James at OMG. Well, Justin has since put out a documentary, a 2-part documentary about his experience at Project Veritas. And he claims that his original Pfizer story was killed by James and Project Veritas and covered up, even though he ended up being hired later. And he said he was hired as part of the cover-up. Justin was also the person who interviewed Jordan Walker. Well, not interviewed, but went on the gay date with that Justin was just so ashamed of, so terrible. Went on the date with Jordan Walker, caught the undercover footage that went viral and their biggest story. And he even claimed that big story was a giant cover-up to cover up his true story of what happened. And the documentary series, he also revealed that James O'Keefe attended Bohemian Grove in the summer of 2023 after all this happened, while OMG was going on, and confirmed that, which is a pretty important detail, I think. But
it's unfortunate he didn't lead with that, but
he didn't lead with that.
He's very similar to James in that his ego got in the way, and he thinks that his first story is like the savior of the world, and so he had to put that at the forefront.
Talk a bit about Justin and his documentary series and just some of the criticisms you have of it, or what you found was inaccurate about his portrayal of what actually happened.
So it's funny because it was really watching this that made me think somebody's got to say something, because this is just absurd. His whole characterization of what was happening behind the scenes at Project Veritas during the production of his investigation was so just wrong. For him to call himself a journalist at all is a mischaracterization. So I was behind the scenes for the entirety of when he became involved with PV. From an all hands that we had in September, where Justin was on the phone with one of our sort of, leads who gets these tips and vets them, on through when, our undercover journalist team was working with him. I knew this was happening. I was actually with James at Tim Pool. Those pictures you showed of me there at Tim Pool, that was the night that they were doing their little investigation of a microscope at this apartment building behind the Project Veritas office in September 2021. It was that same night. And so the way that he described the way that this whole thing happened was just not at all reality. Now, he says that Project Veritas strung him on for months. You have to take into account that we are trying to put together a news story that is factual, not an advocacy video that's meant to get people riled up. And something like the Pfizer vaccine that has so much scientific consideration behind it, we can't just throw up documents and say, we got these from Pfizer. Like, you have to verify that there's something bad there. Otherwise, we're just screaming like the rest of BitChute internet about why the virus is some crazy made up thing. So there is nothing that every single one of us at Project Veritas would have liked more than to like take the lid off of the COVID-19 vaccine. You know, everybody wanted to expose that as being something else other than what it was. But you have to have proof of that. And so Justin Leslie started to send in these videos. Now, it was slow at first, and at most there was maybe one sound bite of interest in each video. We can't make a story out of that. We can't verify that. So we keep asking him to go back and try something else, try a new conversation with somebody higher, try this, try that. There was a lot of coaching involved. I mean, he makes it sound like he just went in there with a camera and did his own Jack Bauer thing inside the office. No, he was in constant communication with the team at Project Veritas, who basically, you know, not coaching him in what to say, but coaching him in what to look for, coaching him in like, we have to basically crash course teach you how to be a journalist. Here are some ways to, you know, do that, you know? So we would get videos from him, and us in production would cut that, and we would try, and every time we got a new one, we would, you know, put anything of interest together to see if there's a way that we can package that in a way that's cohesive and makes sense and, you know, would be a viable release and all backed up information. So all this is happening between September, October. I personally was appalled when I learned on the night of the Tim Pool podcast that they were taking these vials that he took and were now looking at them in some rented microscope in an apartment, honestly thinking that they were going to find like nanobots or something. I mean, it's really crazy. It's honestly absurd. They got this crazy doctor to come in and like they're literally working with like a high school microscope, and it's really absurd. And so all of that was just obviously not touched for a very good reason. We're like, we can't turn this into anything. Not to mention the obvious legal implications. You know, nobody told him to take anything, nothing like that. And I obviously wasn't involved in all of the legal discussions, but later down the line, when it came to discussing release, I was more involved in that. But, you know, in terms of what was needed to get him going, I wasn't involved in those discussions. But he kept sending us videos. We kept giving him feedback. You know, here's what to look out for and all that. Now we're getting into November 2021. And, you know, we have what we think is an okay release, but we're still debating about whether or not the legal challenges that could come about for both Justin and the company were worth the content that was involved. Because we always, those of us in production and a lot of us in the company took this stance of, I mean, if we get like an executive saying that they know that the virus was overinflated and the vaccine was rushed just to make money, and they know it's harmful to people, like if that was a line in a video, that would have gone out in 2 seconds. But that wasn't a line in a video. You have one woman, the Indian woman, saying that it was rushed, which, I mean, there are news articles about Pfizer executives themselves saying that they were building the plane while they were flying it. Like, that's not, you're not uncovering anything. They've said that publicly. You have the guy, sort of, this was his lead video in the documentary, that, you know, they pulled the rug, you know, they tricked the FDA to approve the children's vaccine, basically. When we researched more into that process and, you know, the parts of the video and the full video, and it wasn't exactly as he portrayed that either, because what he was saying was that they got the procedural mix for the vaccine approved, but the solution that it was in was different from approval to production. It's like a saline, or I'm no scientist, but it's like a saline or something that the contents of the vaccine live in. That compound was changed. And apparently with something like that, it's like a procedural thing that they always do. Now you can say, well, you know, they shouldn't do that. And that there's a very good argument for that. But to release that and frame that as some notorious aspect of the COVID-19 vaccine specifically would be factually incorrect. And so that was a consideration we had to have. And so we're trying to think of a way to package all of this information together in a way that, you know, the audience would appreciate, that still does reveal some things. You know, the intrigue of just hearing comments from internal Pfizer employees would be enough to, you know, get people talking about it. But we were not blown away by the newsworthiness of, you know, what he got. So, you know, we're going back and forth, and you'll see in some of the communications that I shared with you guys that there was deliberation through November for a couple of weeks about, you know, different legal reviews and things going on about, you know, what we are going to do with it. And there was a point when the legal team was okay with it. You know, we were all sort of on the same page that, okay, maybe we can do this thing. You know, we're willing to take the risk. And then you'll see a message from James on November 26th, I believe, that basically runs through his reasons for why we should not release it. And it basically goes through all the reasons that I just told you. That we were concerned about the content, that we were concerned about not only the legal aspects, but that, you know, a lot of money was dumped into this. There was not much forethought at the beginning, and it just needed to be more thought out. And it sucks that we can't do it, but, you know, we're just in a tough place with the FBI raids and everything. And so that really doesn't jive with Justin's story that James, like, squashed the story out from under him. You know, all of us at Project Veritas, James included, you know, when we're having those meetings, James is asking production, he's asking the lawyers, like, how can we put this out? How can we make this happen? I mean, and you've heard James in interviews and things since then. He does not have much stock in legal guidance. He would much prefer do something and have the lawyers advise on how to protect him after the fact than have a lawyer tell him what to do. That's just how James is. And so to even suggest that there was some sort of nefarious overarching, you know, reason why just Leslie's story was squashed because it was going to blow the lid off of all of COVID, and James O'Keefe didn't want that to happen, is absolutely absurd. And there's a lot of reasons to there's a lot of reasons to not like James, but this is not one of them. And so the allegations that he is some sort of, you know, government operative, the, you know, internet basement people saying that, you know, he's in on the Pfizer stuff and all that is just, it's so crazy. It's so crazy. He didn't squash the story. Unfortunately, Justin Leslie's content was just not actually strong enough for us to justify putting it out. That's really what it boiled down to. We could not justify the strength of his videos, you know, going up against the problems that it would cause.
So he frames all of that, you know, he frames it as where one of the reasons you guys ended up bringing him on and actually hiring him into the organization was to cover up the fact that you just killed this story. But from, you know, what I recall talking to you about this before, you know, you said he was hired as a sort of consolation because you guys genuinely
we felt so bad. We were like, we were all like, this kid, you know, he's young and he's worked for months and he's been great with, you know, us trying to figure this out and do it the right way. And, you know, he deserves a shot. And he proved himself, obviously, that he can at least do the job. Mm-hmm. And so that's why he was offered a job. It wasn't to cover anything up. It was to hopefully be like, look, this didn't work out, but you're really good. And we want to give you a job that you care about. That's what it was.
And, you know, because his original lead had to do with Pfizer, you guys brought him on to the new Pfizer lead, which ended up being the Jordan Walker.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost a year later, but yeah, I mean, that was obviously his beat. But that just annoyed me so much, and you'll see from the communications that I shared with you that even after the fact, you know, we looked into different ways that we could try to release that, and it just didn't make sense. There was no like effort to string him along and then squash the story. We were desperately trying to get content that would qualify it to be put out. That's what we wanted, but it just didn't happen. And, you know, like I said, James was involved in all of those discussions, and to James's credit, he's the one who, like, he took the responsibility in the office for making that final call. Mm-hmm. You know, and James would do that with some things. He'd be like, you know, there's a lot of deliberation, but I need to make the decision. And he was good about that. And I respect him for that. But, you know, this was one instance where I specifically remember him saying that, you know, we were in the temporary workspace because we still had no office because we're only a few months after the flood. And we're having a long discussion, the production team, a couple of the lawyers, James, and we're talking about what can we do to put this out? And bottom line, it did not reach our threshold. And then for people to suggest that James not putting it out cost the lives of millions is just gross. Yeah. It's really, really sick. I mean, think this is also November 2021. So we're already midway through vaccine mandates in the workplace. The vaccine's been out since like February or March. So by November, if you're someone who was going to get vaccinated, you're already vaccinated.
You got it already.
If you're somebody who's not going to get vaccinated, you probably weren't already. And this video going out was not going to convince anybody who would have already gotten vaccinated to suddenly be like, oh, I can't get this.
Yeah.
And how we, on this subject, how we can't all agree that the vaccine, the way it was rolled out, seems shady. The lockdowns and the mandates were unconstitutional. And, you know, the way that our powers that be went about this whole situation was grossly incorrect, without also agreeing that the vaccine is some sort of nanobot-infused bioweapon that's meant to kill the world's population. I mean,
yeah. Well, you know, I did have an exchange in DMs with Justin Leslie and brought up some of this stuff to him, and even invited him on the show, which he didn't take up that offer, but I told him we were going to bring someone on to clarify some of the things that I mentioned to him. But I also mentioned that he had left certain things out of his documentary about his own actions and behavior while he was there, that you had told me about some of these things. So Justin Leslie was one of the people who was secretly recording Project Veritas staff, correct?
We believe so, yeah. So in the period of time from March to April was when, in a staggered way, journalists would leave without giving note. They would just suddenly leave saying, as of today, I'm resigning, and they would join OMG. The collection of 6 or however many people that went with him. It wasn't some mass walkout. They all did it on their own day, basically. Mm-hmm. Justin was one of the last ones. He basically stayed through the end of March. And we know for a fact that some of them were recording us secretly in the office and giving that to James. We know one person who was an editor was recording us in the office, apparently to get loyalty, to gauge loyalty of who was left and share that with James. And so, yeah, it was crazy. It was absolutely insane. But Justin was one of the last people that left. We believe that he did record some of us in the office. I think he'll say he didn't. To his credit, I don't know.
Well, he in the DM exchange he had with me, he effectively admitted to it, mm-hmm. but that he wasn't responsible for the clip about Stupid Debbie. He said that mm-hmm. that wasn't him, but he didn't deny that he recorded you guys, and kind of he implied that it was part of his investigation on James.
Yeah,
and that it wasn't James directing him to do that to loyalty check, mm-hmm. whatever. And I also brought up what you mentioned earlier, that he drove Alex Stein to the Project Veritas headquarters on orders of James, and for Alex to then proceed to try to harass you guys. He ended up banging on the doors with his homeless sidekick guy, and making us.
I mean, we're Project Veritas. Like we didn't lose our know-how for doing things just because James left. So we knew prior that James had organized with Alex Stein to come and harass the office. So we were prepared for it. So we were watching. We saw the van show up. We saw the couple of undercover journalists in the car. I guess Justin was his escort. And yeah, so they were obviously all working together.
Well, he said he was doing it to do the Alex Stein story. I'm like, that wasn't there was no story. You drove him there to harass the staff, and just include that in your documentary. You're not some angel. You were doing things to help James get back at his staff. So I think that is kind of an important point, and I wanted to make sure that got out there. But what I will say,
made it sound like he went through no training and he was the guy. The amount of people that had to coach him on how to do his job properly once he was employee is staggering.
Yeah.
And you can tell by the editing of his documentary, quite frankly. But, our comms guys, our other undercover journalists, myself, Pam Brown, our executive producer, all of us worked very, very closely with him on every single thing he did to guide him on how to go about, these investigations. Right. Now, he has a knack for talking to people. Yes. He has a knack for, getting the right sort of content said, because he knows how to phrase questions and whatnot. That all of that is there. He has natural talent. I'm not denying that at all. But for him to suggest that he went into this with, basically no guidance is factually wrong. He got a lot of training, a lot of guidance, and he was a young kid. And so, it was a while before he did something, like got his own story, because he was basically, under the wing of other journalists for the first few months of being an employee.
Well, what I will say is, certainly the revelation of James's attendance at Bohemian Grove is an important story. Yeah. And, like you said, he probably should have led with that instead of
led with that, because that's the only newsworthy thing.
That was a newsworthy thing, and he did confirm it. You know, he showed the tent pass. He got a picture of that, the letter that was sent to James, and in an event of irony, ended up getting loyalty checked himself by James, who called him, in which, you know, he recorded that conversation, basically confirming that James went to Bohemian Grove, and trying to gauge Justin's feelings about that, because certain staff at OMG had found out about it and were expressing concern about how that would look. You also told me that James had been invited to Bohemian Grove before in the past.
He had, yeah. Now, I'm not sort of a Bohemian Grove conspiratorial type. A lot of the people that left with James, a lot of the journalists are more in that camp. If you want to believe that, that's great, whatever. But I do believe that, you know, it was newsworthy in the sense that I think that the audience would find it interesting to know, specifically the right-wing audience, who James basically knows he can only cater to at this point, would find it interesting to know that, you know, not only did he attend, but many of his and Project Veritas' historical donors are members that attend that. That's interesting, not because you have to believe that there's baby eating sacrifices, but interesting just in the sense that it's this, you know, super secret elite club made up of people that you would traditionally expect Project Veritas to investigate, when really it's people in those sort of upper echelons that are funding it. You know, that is an interesting story.
Yeah.
Which is, again, why he should have led with it, and something that, you know, James hasn't spoken on, and, you know, I think should have been, you know, approached not from the conspiratorial standpoint.
Yeah.
But
well, he did not do that. He did comment on it on a Twitter space, but he kind of dismissed people's questions about it, like, oh, you know, sometimes journalists just can't give their sources and we can't talk about it. But clearly,
sources, he wasn't.
He was not. He was there as a guest. He was clearly not there with the intention to try to blow the lid open on it. He said he saw nothing strange or unusual, and sure, maybe he didn't. But the point is, he tried to hide this from his staff. And then when some of them found out about it and were concerned, he was upset that they were challenging him on it or questioning why he went there, when I think any rational person would have questions about that. So, you know, I thought that was interesting.
And yet again, this is sort of the pattern of James O'Keefe being his own worst enemy, and just not addressing people's concerns, not listening to people openly, and not taking feedback that he's given to heart. When it was one of the things I noticed in the board meeting, was that he sort of acknowledged at one point that he had to change. Like,
yes, he did.
James said that several times. He knows he has to change in order for Project Veritas to survive. That's a quote. And he offered help. He offered, you know, he understood he needs help dealing with people. Like, those were all things he said, and the board was extraordinarily receptive to that. It was only once the issue of his powers came into play that he went off the rails.
Well, I hope people watching this will see that we are trying as much as possible to be balanced in our criticism of James O'Keefe. You know, like we just revealed before, you know, we exonerated him of these accusations that he killed this Pfizer story and made a cover up.
He didn't kill it. He didn't cover it up. And, honestly, when Justin called him for comment on all this, James handled that absolutely brilliantly.
He ran circles.
He could not have been better on that call. And it just goes to show, when you have an inexperienced, activist-driven person, not journalist-driven, activist-driven person trying to get a specific reaction because they have a specific belief about something, James knows how to dismantle that.
He did. I remember Justin's hand was like shaking in that video too. So
Justin is also a very young guy. Like, this is one of those things. Young. Like, he was like, what, 21, 22, 23 when he was at Pfizer. And like, it's just like, and I feel bad for him in a way, because when you're that young, you sort of let your emotions get the best of you. You start thinking with the emotional energy, and then you start drawing conclusions based on that malformed thought process where you think you have something very sort of sensational when in actuality, with a little objective criticism applied, it's not exactly what you seem to think that it is. And this is one of the things in science that, like, you know, you really have to have an open dialogue with your critics. And it's funny that Justin and James both have that same sort of fatal flaw about themselves and their content.
They're the same person.
They're quite similar.
It's very ironic.
I don't understand how I did not get a shout out in Justin's documentary. I was not listed in the end of all the Project Veritas people. Do you know who edited his Justin Walker releases? I did. Do you know who structured them? Do you know who led the sort of like editorial meetings where we talked about what's the content? How are we gonna put this out there? What's the story? That was me and Pam. You know, I worked directly with Justin on that. And so, yeah, I don't know where my call out was. Yeah.
Well, I hope he will also, you know, because I'm sure he's going to watch this as well. I hope he will also see that we are trying to be as balanced as possible with our critique of him as well. We're not trying to tear him down. In fact, you know, if he's watching this right now, we invite him to come talk. And if anything, maybe we can set up a conversation between the two of you if he wishes. He wants to push back on some of the things that you're saying, but we do have the receipts. We are going to release them along with this. Anyone who wants to look at the internal communications of how his story and all of that was being handled and discussed and why it didn't end up running can look at that and see for themselves that it wasn't this exclusive decision where James killed the story. It was a decision by legal, by development, by everyone basically involved, and that you guys tried as much as you could to figure out a way to make it.
We wanted desperately to put his story out, and it just did not hit the criteria.
I mean, Justin, like he went a little off the deep end with the viruses aren't real kind of.
Yeah, now viruses aren't real. It's a known bioweapon.
I've heard the argument before, and it's not great. I mean, you can find viruses, you can grow viruses, you can cultivate viruses. Viruses are real; they're a thing. I mean, you can debate whether or not they're alive, but
and that is a whole discussion that can be had. You know,
totally,
it's kind
totally,
of a
100%
separate thing. But the last thing, because we've been going a while here, that I'll touch on.
We have to get to the recent beef.
So the recent thing is Kyle Seraphin, who is one of the former. He was a former FBI agent. He was one of the whistleblowers of Project Veritas, and someone that James at AmFest called the bravest person I know.
Also a former guest on this show.
And a former guest on the show. We've spoken with Kyle before as well. You know, he seems like a genuine man. I've never hung out with him personally, so I can't comment on that. But it's interesting to see him and James O'Keefe now going at it publicly on Twitter. And the way James is now trying to spin Kyle's criticism of him as some kind of psyop. He's now accusing Kyle of.
And this is very classic James being I'm the martyr.
Well, he's now accusing Kyle of being directly involved in the coup against him, and even implied in a Twitter space the other day that, you know, the $10 million $10 million that went missing, you know, implying that Kyle had some kind of hand in that, and that he might still be a Fed, implying these things, you know, not right out saying it. So, you know, I guess comment on that whole situation. And
well, one of the things that Project Veritas did very well was that they didn't just do honeypot or honey dick operations. Like, there was a lot of legitimate journalism that was happening in the past, and it was good stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, so Kyle has these very pointed critiques of this was a recent CIA mid-level CIA contractor who was on a gay date, and the guy was basically, you know, saying a lot of the stuff that we sort of all know, but this CIA guy saying it was like, you know, giving it a new weight, like that they were targeting Alex Jones and you know, like all these things. And it was just kind of like funny, because if you actually watch the video and pay attention to the way that this guy is just talking, his cadence, his tone of voice, it seemed clear to me anyway, as a homosexual man who's been on homosexual dates before, that he is, you know, sort of telling this guy what he wants to hear so that he can get him in bed later.
Yeah.
And like, that's a legitimate criticism. Like like
I find it odd and so sort of interesting that James's bread and butter now are these gay dates. But it's really sad, because back to when, you know, he had the one with that guy from the White House and then blasted that guy's, you know, Tinder profile as a justification for verifying who he was. It's like, I feel like to James and to the audience he's catering to, that he feels like part of the fact that these are stories is because it's a gay man and because it's James O'Keefe like tricking him. It's not about the content that's involved. You know, you're taking these sad, lonely men and you're basically, and I mean, this argument could really be said for any of these honeypot situations, you know, getting these people to say what you want them to say. But I mean, these mid to low level leftist government gay guys who are basically telling you colloquial leftist terminology and then putting it out there and acting like it's some huge revelation. It's like, I'm sorry, but a lot of that would not have passed the bar of release at Project Veritas. It wouldn't have. And so that whole issue aside, I do find it interesting and kind of funny that Kyle is speaking out, and I appreciate it because no one else is. Everybody is still pretending like this is the best thing they've ever seen. And I mean, Kyle has not liked James for a very long time. Kyle basically has not liked James since the day he met him, because we were, you know, shooting Kyle's undercover, sort of in the shadows insider interview. I believe this was April or May 2022. We went down to DC. I was there. I was present for the whole thing. And poor Kyle had to wait hours because first James was late, and then other people were on a plane that was late, and then finally everybody's there, and now James wants to talk about it and acts like he doesn't know what's going on with the story, like we haven't briefed him on it already. And so Kyle eventually comes upstairs to where we're planning on filming, sees James like berating everybody, sees him in a terrible attitude. He's kind of ignoring Kyle, and Kyle just from the beginning, he did not have a good impression of James. And I got that directly from Kyle. I got that directly from the journalist who was basically Kyle's handler for Project Veritas. It's from day one, that relationship was not, you know, existent. So Kyle shoots the interview with us. We shoot it. We put that video out. It honestly wasn't as big as we hoped it would be. We thought that it would be much larger, and I mean, it did okay, but it wasn't.
At the time, I thought it was a huge story. Like,
yeah, it did all right. And so then, you know, in trying to conceptualize this year's 2022's stage presentation at Turning Point in December, because we had set the bar with mini Project Veritas experience the year prior. Now we have to do another, you know, extravaganza. We figure we'll do, you know, we'll bring all the insiders out. We'll make it this inspirational thing, and we'll end with the public unveiling of Kyle Seraphin and his family. So we do that. When coming up with these things, James would basically send me videos if we goes to like an EDM show or something and just tell me I want it to look like this. Mm-hmm. So then I need to then figure out how to go to a venue that I don't own, run by people that I'm not in charge of, and get them to do this light show that I have no control over. That was always a fun part of my job. But that's how that went. But basically, James, you know, we came up with this idea of, you know, having these FBI dancers on stage that intro this dramatic thing, and then all the insiders come out. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but Kyle wanted nothing to do with any dancing, and none of it. He almost pulled out of the whole thing. He's like, I want this to be strictly talking about stories. He was not amused by the dancing at all. So I had to talk to him. I had a long conversation with him, me and the journalist who was in charge of him. And so, you know, I was able to convince him that, you know, it's not going to be some campy thing. There won't be like choreographed dancers around you. Like, there will be people on stage in FBI sort of outfits, but it's not going to be some crazy choreographed thing. So you should, you know, I guarantee you that. So he finally agreed to still come out and do it. So this is my second time meeting Kyle in person. We're at AmFest in Arizona, December 2022. And I mean, he's a very nice guy. He's very level-headed. He comes across as like sort of stern and serious. And I got that impression from him also, you know, when I was having the phone call with him, because again, I'm coming from the standpoint of, you know, whether some people believe it or not, I do believe in James's, you know, desire to add more of a creative element to what we do and try to get people remembering things in a different way than just dry news articles and being so super serious.
It is a good point, because one of the criticisms, even myself, that I have of like conservative right-wing, you know, side of the political spectrum is they kind of disregard entertainment and creativity.
They take themselves too seriously. And that's one area where the movement has absolutely failed over the last decade. Yeah. You know, that's something that Andrew Breitbart was all in for. He wanted that irreverent culture. You had to get into the culture. You could not just focus on the politics. But now all they do is have these political rallies, and they don't know how to break into just having fun with it. And, you know,
and when they do, it's not often very good.
It's campy and it's weird.
Campy,
And I'm not going to say the Project Veritas stuff wasn't, but we were trying to get it to the point where it wasn't campy and weird. Anyway, Kyle was not in that camp. He was the super serious war side of things. So finally convinced him to still go through with it. So he came, we, you know, did run-throughs in Arizona. He was great. You know, once you get past sort of the super serious sort of, you know, demeanor, he's a very nice guy. He's very funny.
When we had him on the show, there was some levity there. We were joking with him. He was, you know, very personable.
It's clear that he's, you know, a loving family guy. You know, his family was there, and, you know, I never had any, you know, disbelief or anything that, you know, he was still working for the FBI or anything like that. I think Kyle truly believes in what he's been doing. And, you know, for James to insinuate that he's part of some psyop just because he now disagrees with James's new gay date tactic is absurd.
Well, it's also crazy because there are people accusing him of that very thing for attending Bohemian Grove, that he's being handled, that he's a part of a psyop. You know, you could very well lay those similar sort of insinuations against.
Yeah. Which once again, I don't know why you can't question the reasons James went and the people he met with at this super secret, you know, elite club, and not go as far as it's some secret government psyop. Well, maybe he just has really rich donors that go there and he's friends with them and he's trying to ham it up with them.
Well, and also, I mean, if you're trying to raise money, you're going to go to where the money is.
Exactly. And you can ask the questions, why is he raising money as a for-profit entity? Why is he raising money from individuals who typically you would consider to be investigated subjects of himself and Project Veritas? You can ask those questions without, you know, making the leap that it's some, you know, child-eating cult or that he's part of some government psyop.
So, you know, having worked with him for a few years and spending time with him on a personal level, was there any indication to you that he was like being handled?
The guy can't do his laundry. All right. He was not being handled. If he was being handled, he was being handled by us. You know, I mean, and this is the problem. And this is where the financial stuff really got fuzzy, because James's life literally was Project Veritas. And you can take that with all the good and you can take that with all the bad. But James's life was that company. And so everything he did was in some way financed by the company. And so, you know, again, take that with the good and the bad, because he's constantly traveling for things and all that. And so there was definitely a fuzzy line there in some instances. James is not a thief. He wasn't stealing money. There was no embezzlement. There was nothing like that. But there was a very loose differentiation that the company was trying to tighten up when it came to finances and what they were used from a personal and professional level.
In the board meeting audio, I don't remember who said it. It may have been Tom's testimony, I think. But, you know, noticing that, or maybe it was Hinckley, that James was living one type of lifestyle and everyone else was living another. That was the way it was sort of described financially.
I mean, kind of, but I mean, it wasn't that feudalistic, you know. But we did stay at hotels that didn't have to be so expensive. We did, you know, do things that didn't have to be so expensive. I remember in September 2021, we were in San Antonio, and we were filming Jody O'Malley's interview, the FDA whistleblower, or HHS whistleblower, I'm sorry. And that was a great vaccine-related story. I loved Jody's story. And Jody, unfortunately, she's in on the James camp as well, and I felt a little betrayed by that. But I got to know Jody well, and she's a wonderful woman. But I remember we had to show up early to that shoot. James wasn't there yet. And we wanted to use his suite as the shoot location. So that's where he was staying. That was his suite. So I had to use my personal credit card to put a hold for them to allow me to check in as him so I could get keys to go into that suite. The security hold that was put on my car was $20,000. So
what?
Yeah, the security hold that was put on my car was $20,000. So, I mean, thankfully I have one of those Amex that can do that, but like,
it's crazy.
You know, if that gives you any indication of the sort of money that was being spent on lodging and whatnot, when you could make the argument that it didn't have to be. So again, James was not stealing. There was nothing like that, but there could have been more frugality for sure. And I remember there was a moment in September 2022 when we were down in Washington, D.C. for the Democracy Partners trial that was taking place. And James insisted on like the whole company being down there and living there through the course of the trial because he wanted videos produced throughout, you know, of the courtroom and all that. None of that ended up happening because we couldn't do it. And it ended up being a lot of wasted money, you know, lodging so many people down there for weeks. But there was one moment when a couple of us were leaving dinner and I walked out on the sidewalk in Washington, D.C. out of this fancy restaurant, and I see these homeless people on the street, and we're climbing into the Cadillac car service that picked us up, and this light bulb just went off in my head that, you know, I just had dinner at some restaurant and I didn't even have to look at the price. Someone just put a card down and that was it. Now I'm getting home, or I'm getting to my paid for hotel in a black Cadillac, and I didn't order that, but somebody did, and they didn't think about that at all. And it suddenly dawned on me why so many people in DC start nonprofits and things like that, because you can live these lifestyles subsidized by other people that you basically have no accountability to. I don't know how many old ladies paid for that Cadillac ride, but they did. And so that was a really eye-opening moment to me, that's really when I started to think about, you know, maybe some of the things that we're doing, we don't have to do it that way. We can be smarter with the funds of the company. And that's all Tom O'Hara wanted. That's all Dan Strack wanted. That's all any of them wanted, was to just be smarter with the way we did things.
Well, this goes back to one of the comments that Kyle had made on Twitter, basically saying something along the lines of, you know, how much money from families has he taken, or, you know, money is taken from your families. something along those lines. And James responded to that by basically implying that it sounded like Kyle wished they gave him more money and helped him more and all that, when it sounds like Kyle was actually talking about what you just mentioned, like how many people are donating money to this organization, or not, well, his current one, but the previous one as well, that was funding this lifestyle, this lavish lifestyle.
Yeah, it was definitely a subsidized lifestyle. And I mean, James never stopped working, and I don't think he does now. And that was always something that I admired about him. And I'm not saying that just because you're a nonprofit, you have to live in squalor. But there was definitely waste. You know, we could have been smarter with some things, and that's all the board wanted to get tightened up. You know, I'm no mouthpiece for the board, but in speaking to Dan Strack and others, I mean, I have no reason to believe otherwise. You know, I got close with Tom O'Hara in the period of time leading up to, you know, our eventual firings, and was sort of, you know, had his ear with like, hey, how much time we got left? You know, what do we need? You know, just trying to keep that gauge going. And he was very upfront and he was very honest. And, you know, these are guys that had extreme personal and legal liability, and there was no reason for them to, you know, want to oust James or anything like that. Nobody was paid by Pfizer, that's for sure. And if they were, I don't know where my cut was, but yeah. There was no Pfizer money to be had.
Let us know when your check finally.
Yeah, I'll see where that is.
Well, I guess this is a good place to wrap it up. We've gone 3.5 hours. This might be our longest episode, perhaps. You know, on that note, like, thank you very much, Kalen, for coming forward and choosing to just shine a light on this story. You know, obviously it's a niche story. I think, you know, only people who are involved in the political social commentary sphere will even care about these details. But I think it is important to just have a nuanced, balanced perspective on it, you know, and I thank you for sharing your story and shedding light on what actually happened as you lived it. So I hope other people who watch this will at least take it into consideration, and that they'll look at what happened a little differently, and, you know, maybe not be afraid to criticize James O'Keefe simply because he's famous.
Yeah. And, you know, like I said, I mean, I appreciate you guys taking the time and wanting to talk about this. I mean, like I said at the beginning, you know, we've sort of chatted about, you know, telling this side of the story for almost a year now. And, you know, I just didn't want to, and not out of fear, but just because I'm like, it's not my story. I don't want to put myself out there. I have nothing to lose, but, you know, I have no reason to really speak out on it, because I hope that the truth got out naturally. But
it is your story, though. It is partly your story. You did live this, you know, you lived through it. It personally affected you, you know, and as your friend, I saw how it affected you, and I met some of the other staff and I saw how it affected them. So it is your story, and I think it is worth putting out there. And I think your motivations are very clearly genuine. You're not doing this to try to get attention. You're not doing this to try to get revenge. You're doing this simply to set the record straight so you can sleep at night.
Yeah, I mean, it's really for my past colleagues, and you know, just all of them. And there are still some people that are hurting from this. You know, some people are still trying to find jobs from getting fired because James destroyed the company. I mean, he did. There's no way around that. You know, Hannah Giles is a footnote in, you know, the failures of Project Veritas in the last year, but James is the one that fatally shot it, and nobody wanted him gone. And he was perfectly happy to see a group of people that have done nothing with their lives but support him in everything that he did and make sure that he looked the absolute best and was the absolute best that he could be. He had no problem seeing them, you know, basically fall off and, you know, go
thrown under the bus.
Yeah,
I think would be the term.
Yeah. He had no problem with that, and so that's what's really bothered me the most. And so just making sure that people understand that these are talented, dedicated people who are still dedicated to the mission of Project Veritas, and there was no intention in staying other than keeping that alive because we thought that that's what the audience wanted. And we were very saddened to learn over the last year that that appears to not be what the audience wanted. They wanted the fame and the clicks and the clout and the cash involved with the internet celebrities of the right-wing movement. And I think that, you know, if that doesn't change, we're going to see some implosions that, you know, we don't want to see. You know, that this movement can't subside. It can't sustain itself on that. There needs to be value. There needs to be actual integrity behind these people. And this whole situation proved to us that many of them don't have that.
Kalen, thank you so much. Everyone, if you sat through all of that, thank you as well. Please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, help us be grifters and all that shit you're going to accuse us of. And we'll be back with another episode as soon as possible. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.